Have you been to Africa?
I
Anything
have
like that?
not. I've only been to out of the country. I've been to Europe. Then I've been to Australia, New Zealand, but never to
Ooh.
Africa or Asia.
How
So,
was Australia and New Zealand? I've wanted to go there
um,
for forever.
both were pretty great. Australia was a little bit more Americanishy. I felt like
Mm.
the my sister, her husband was a pastor in New Zealand for a while, so I spent like 6 months over there. Maybe it was 4 months in 2012 there, and then I visited him again in 2014. I really like preaching in Australia. Actually, the
Hmm.
students are much more respectful than American students. Although I got shut down once I answered the question on homosexuality. This homosexual kept asking me, and I was like, I think they'll shut me down in like a British Commonwealth type thing. I'm like, I think they shut you down if you answer that question.
Yeah.
So I punted for like 2 hours, and finally, after 2 hours, I answered the kid's question. The police immediately shut me down, and I immediately cooperated because I didn't want to be the
Oh
American
yeah,
who's
yeah,
just, you know
right.
what I mean, like
Yeah, yeah,
pushing back. So I was like, all right, I'm out of here.
yeah. You don't want to enforce stereotypes
Yeah,
because
yeah,
they
exactly. Like
have those.
I'll cooperate, and but then I spent a lot more time in New Zealand. The main thing, like, I really like New Zealand. Like, it's almost like, I grew up in the '80s. It was almost like a throwback to the '80s. Like, the pace was just slow. Like, the, it was just like technologically, they just kind of seem behind. Their roads aren't like major, so like if you travel from one town to the next, it's just kind of slow. So I that part I really like. The thing I couldn't stand about it culturally, they have a thing called the tall poppy, where if you stand out too much, they want to cut you down. So it's almost like a
Hmm.
cultural
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
socialism. And so, like, if you're successful, and I'm fine with, like, if you're successful, you don't let tons of people know your success or whatever it is.
yeah,
But
yeah.
like, a friend of mine was a lawyer. He got promoted. Like, I lived in New York, worked in finance for a couple of years, and if you got promoted, everybody took you out to dinner and celebrated. You know what I mean? There, you just didn't tell anybody. You know what I mean? So it was
Right.
like, and I hated that. I was like, no,
Yeah.
let's celebrate. And even something as stupid, I want to say the American women either won like the World Cup or they won like the gold medal in the Olympics. And we were watching the game at like 6 o'clock in the morning, and we're kind of like, whatever, woo, yeah. And a Kiwi was like, well, don't let anybody out there know. They don't want to hear you celebrate. It was just like, it's first of all, it's 6 o'clock in the morning. Secondly, what are we going to do? Like, it's
Yeah.
women's soccer. You know what I mean?
Right.
Like, are we
Yeah.
going to go rub it into the Kiwis'
Oh.
faces?
Were they beating New Zealand?
No, I don't.
Okay, it's
They'd
just
be
a
like
random
Norway.
country.
Yeah, yeah, they'd be like Norway or something like that. And so, like, those sorts of things, like one, we're not going to do that. Secondly, like, even if you're a New Zealander, at least like if I was in New York, like if your team won a soccer match, like people would celebrate in the street a
Yeah,
bit. You know what I
right.
mean? And so anyway, there that was the thing that drove me nuts about New Zealand. I liked it from a pace standpoint, and like life just seems slow, and that's actually pretty nice. But then culturally, you just kind of had like, I felt like it was a little oppressive.
I had the same thing in Africa. The guy who owned the apartment complex I was staying in was quite wealthy, done quite well for himself, especially by African standards, which
Mhm.
are noticeably lower.
Yeah.
And so he had quite a bit of money, but he didn't show anyone. Like he lived like 30 minutes outside of town. It was impossible to find him. He was behind a gated community,
Uh
and
huh.
like he drove a regular car. And you don't show that you're wealthy because then there's a weird cultural expectation that if you have money, you're going to help all the friends and relatives who don't have money with
Hmm.
their various surgeries and
Mm.
other medical problems and financial problems. And so, and because most of the people over there aren't fiscally responsible or wise or anything like that, they kind of just rely on if they have a rich person in their family.
Kind of,
It's the same thing.
it sheds a little light, like a little bit like American ghetto culture. Like if you're a
Yeah,
successful basketball player or something like that, you're expected to take care of everybody, and
right.
next thing you know, they're all bankrupt. So,
Which is, which I mean, it can have like a good side where, you have a successful person in your family, and then they kind of raise their family up out of
hmm,
poverty, and friends and family, and then like that's a really like it's wholesome. It's the kind of thing that's really wonderful.
yeah,
But there's also most of the time there's not a lot of gratitude. There's just an expectance of like, no, 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 gimme,
uh
because
huh,
we're in the same family,
yeah,
and that ends up just destroying the person who has the money, and then it alienates them from their family and their friends,
hmm,
and they get outcast from social society. And then everyone's like, hey, what are you doing? Why aren't you at family gatherings anymore? And you can't explain to them like, hey, it's because you're actually limiting my earning potential and my potential to provide for my family in a way I
yeah,
really want to,
hmm,
with your continuous leeching
yeah.
off
And
of
if
me.
it's one thing if they're becoming productive capital, producing capital,
Right?
but it's another thing
Yeah.
if you're just draining the
Yeah.
family. Yeah.
Yeah. It's that's one of the things that I was also like, man, this would like you can't get out
Hmm.
of that.
Yeah.
You have to kind of go to a lot of the people who I talked to who wanted to be successful. They're like, I have to leave this country.
Yeah. Makes sense. Yeah.
That's
Yeah.
that's not conducive to long-term
Yeah,
success for a
yeah.
country.
Uh-huh. Yeah, and you can kind of see where, like, you see the memes, not to sound like a racist, but you see the memes where it's like, Europe, Africa today. Yeah, Europe in like
Yeah, right.
1500, Africa in
Africa,
15 today, you know what I mean? It's
yeah,
kind of,
right.
there isn't that
Or
major.
the like Africa after $7 billion. It's the same thing, just with Land Rovers.
Yeah.
Anyway, yeah, no, there's a whole lot of problems there, but I realized I couldn't solve them all on my own, so I
Uh-huh.
came back.
Yeah, that's good. Yeah, and I was gonna say it's a good recognition because even something as simple here in the States, I had friends coming out of college who thought they were gonna go like, you might be too young for a movie. What was that movie called? It's like not Gangster's Paradise. It was
Oh, Welcome to America?
no, it was I can't remember. Michelle Pfeiffer played an educator that went to like the ghetto and helped people come out. And one of the famous songs that they played was Coolio's "Gangster Paradise" was like the theme for the movie, but I can't remember what the movie was actually called. Anyway, I had some friends of mine who all thought they're going to go into the inner city and help educate and get
Mhm.
them all out, and they were like inspired, kind of like, oh yeah, we're going to do that. And then they get there, and you start to like my one friend. He's like, I knew had to leave because one day, two girls get in a fight. The next day, aunts from the family show up to fight. You know what I mean? He's like, when the families are showing up the next day to settle tribal warfare. You know what I mean? He's like, he's like, there's only so much you can do.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, when you have them for 6 or 7 hours a day, and then they go back to an environment that is totally chaotic.
Yeah.
So anyway, he left that and he's doing other things now. So
Yeah, I do wonder if you just like, how do you solve that problem? Is it just like you need to leave?
hmm yeah, I think it's a barring like a major Christian revival where people are actually submissive. You know what I mean? And like enough of the
Yeah.
community because I think your only bet is like, all right, we got to get out of here. And
That's what I don't know if you've read J.D. Vance's book,
I've not. No.
Hillbilly Elegy. It's so Thomas Sowell puts out in his Black Rednecks and White Liberals the case for this is not, necessarily it's a culture that Black people created. It's something they inherited from a lot of the Scottish white people who were up in the Highlands. And so this is a problem that has been going on for much longer than America's even been around. We have this kind of tribal warfare, and it's honor-centered culture as opposed to I don't even know what the other. I mean, there's fear cultures, which is something like Africa, but this is a very honor-centered culture. So if you have someone who insults your family, here in the in Idaho, we can make your mom jokes and all over the place, and everyone's like, ah, ha, ha, right, yeah. But there, it's like, okay, you're like, it almost seen as a physical assault
Yeah,
on
you
that
disrespect
person's
it, yeah,
right, and so there's like a cultural expectation that I'm gonna go beat that person up.
Yeah. Next thing you have the Hatfields and McCoys, and you got
Right.
generations of
Right, and
Yeah.
that's how that happens. And so J.D. Vance was like, one of the things that helped was I left and went to the Marines, and that was a moment where you're in a completely different culture that you have no control over. It's not like you're gonna change the Marines. They're still gonna do their thing. And there's expectations of like, no, you will do XYZ thing. You will take accountability for your life. You will take accountability for your problems. You will take responsibility. You will go fix whatever problem this is. We will hand you things that are too hard for you to do, and you will grow and you will learn and you will become better and able to deal with those things. But that's something that has to be imposed on from an outside culture. Now, he went to that outside culture, but that's how he was able to. He couldn't start with imposing that on himself.
Yeah.
And
Now look at him.
now look at him. He's the vice president of the U.S. So
Yeah.
clearly something worked out.
Good gig.
There you go. All right, yeah, roughly a fist away from your face. There you go.
Okay.
Fantastic. Keith Darrell, thank you so much for joining me.
Thanks for having me.
Pleasure having you. So you've been campus. How long have you been campus preaching?
Well, the first time I ever preached was in the year 2000. So I was in seminary. I took a semester off of seminary. I traveled and preached for about 15, 16 weeks. Bought myself, it was kind of a fun time. I lived in a Volkswagen bus and preached. Everybody thought I was a drug dealer. They'd come up and I'd tell them about Jesus. So that was a good time. So September of 2000 at Slippery Rock University, just north of Pittsburgh, was the first place I ever preached. I was thinking about doing it for a while. I was got interested in it going into college, and then some friends were like, hey, you've been thinking about doing this for a while. Here's some money. Go give it a shot. So I bought myself a bus, started doing it. And yeah, first day, I preached for maybe 15 minutes. I ran out of things to say, and a little bit of a crowd gathered, but I didn't know how to keep them or anything like that. So that was my first experience. So yeah, so 25 years, basically a quarter century. And then I spent 2005, 2010. I worked in finance and I lived in New York City. And then I left that April of 2010 so I could travel and preach full time.
What made you go into finance after?
I studied economics and finance in undergrad. That was my so a little bit of my background. I was kind of a leftist in high school, largely due to my friends. I had some friends of mine whose parents were hippies. And we would sit at their dinner table and we'd talk conspiracies and how bad the government was. But what was interesting was that all their solutions were government. You know what I mean? The government's bad, but but it's only the capitalist government's bad. If you had a Marxist government,
everything would obviously work out great. See, look at Cuba. They're doing fantastic right now.
Any communist state, all you got to do is look at any communist state and you realize how great it is. And but then I felt like I lost the debate to my brother on whether or not welfare helped or hurt the poor. And he bought me a book, Rush Limbaugh, The Way Things Ought to Be. And I read Rush Limbaugh's book in a weekend and I kind of swung conservative. And that even got me onto a trajectory of Christianity because I don't know exactly how he worded it, but basically there was a line in there that without God, there's no morality. And I remember just thinking like, yeah, that's right. And then then I just realized I was systematically violating the morality. So then you're up against the problem of I was violating the morality. But that was kind of the impetus. I was, impetus towards it. So getting into Rush, getting into the welfare thing, economics fascinated me. And I just love like the logic of it. Like what are the unintended consequences of legislation and stuff like that. So anyway, I went off to college, study economics and finance. Then I went to seminary. And, as a guy, you wake up, and you're like, I need to know I can have a real job. There's a sense in which ministry is not a real job in a way. So I needed to know I could go have a real job and be successful. I was living in the Midwest. I was like, I'm either going to go to Seattle, Washington, or New York City. I was actually born in Long Island. My parents are from Brooklyn. I had family over there that I knew and were friendly with, but didn't know well. I was like, I'm going to go to New York for I thought it'd just be like a year. And fortunately, I got a good job and it just kind of sucked me in for 5 years. And then in 2009, I had like 7 or 8 people from different walks of my life literally contact me in about an 8-week period to say, hey, you're wasting your life in finance, go preach. And so I was like, all right, I'm going to go preach.
Because you got into it in 2000. Was that like in the middle of college or?
That was seminary, right after my first year of seminary. Okay. So how I kind of got into it was going into, as my theology has morphed, so I was baptized as an Episcopalian as a baby. Okay. And I kind of always believed Jesus, but you're growing up in a liberal church, no one's actually telling you what to believe about Jesus. Right? So on the bright side, the liturgy, going through the liturgy each week, I had the Nicene Creed, the Apostles' Creed. I went through confirmation, had to learn the 10 Commandments, the Lord's Prayer. I think those were the 4 things I had to have memorized. And so when the lights went on, it was like I was in a house filled with furniture, and then I knew how to place things. You know what I mean? It was almost like, oh, this is... I remember my first week of college, shortly after I would usually say I was converted, a friend of mine, we believe in the doctrine of the Trinity. And I was like, well, what's that? I was like, oh, is that I believe in God the Father Almighty? And he's like, yeah. I was like, okay, I believe that. So I was like, okay. So a lot of the pieces were there. So I went off to college, and there was a man preaching who I love, and he may have been a heretic, to be honest with you. His name was Jed Smock, and he was an open...
I think I've heard of it. I've heard of him. Yeah,
Brother Jed. He's kind of the kingpin of modern campus preaching. And he's a real piece of work. I saw him preach in my freshman year of college. Everyone's like, "Stay away from the guy that preaches in front of the union." And my natural instinct is, I got to go find the guy who preaches in front of the union. And he was out there, and he was outrageous. I mean, he was very theatrical, and he'd be like, "You whores and whoremongers," and there's a cartoon at that time named Beavis and Butthead, and they would do this little thing where someone would mention fire. I never watched the show, but I knew but he'd go, "Yeah, fire, fire, fire," and he'd maybe play with not a match, but lighter. And but what was funny was, so Jed, one of the things that was genius about him is he knew how to read a crowd. And so like he would say something, and he noticed, apparently he had noticed that they respond whenever he says fire. And so he would have like, say Revelation 21:8 all memorized. He'd go through the different moralities and Revelation, all liars, your place is going to be in the lake of fire. And all the students are going, yeah, fire, fire, fire. And what he would do in doing that is he just build the crowd. All these more kids would start coming in and be like, yeah, fire, fire, fire. At the time, I thought everybody was making fun of him. But now that you're a street preacher, like, oh no, he's doing that very intentionally to build his crowd and get everybody in. And at the time, I thought he was just Like I really liked him because he was bold. He was confronting sin. He was kind of preaching sin, righteousness, and judgment. But he's also, when you got into his theology, it was pretty wacky. But I remember seeing him, and I didn't have any philosophy of ministry. You know what I mean? I'm a liberal Episcopal church to evangelicalism. And I went home, I read the book of Acts, and I was like, well, this is what they're doing in Acts. This is what Jesus was doing. This is what the apostles were doing. I was involved with, it's now called Cru, but at the time, Campus Crusade for Christ. And we were reading a book on revival, and I was reading about Whitefield and Wesley and stuff like that. And I was like, well, this is what they're doing. So I was immediately drawn to it. I saw him doing it. I would see 200 kids gathered, and kids that would not interact with us the rest of the year.
You're right, yeah.
Yeah, that was the other thing I loved about him was all these crazy people that won't come to a crusade meeting or interact with us any other time. They're out there for 3 or 4 hours. And so that was kind of the main appeal was like, he's interacting with people that won't interact with us. And we keep poo-pooing him as if he's bad, but he's actually, then when I could go back to my dorm and people would want to talk to me about the gospel and stuff like that. So that was my initial interest in it, was basically seeing Jed, then going home and reading Acts. That was basically
Was the Episcopal Church any better back then?
No, it was, I remember sitting down with my priest my sophomore year, and I was just asking about some of the stories of the Bible. And I don't even remember what my questions were. I can vividly remember being in his office and just being like, do we believe like Jonah? And like, oh no, those are just good stories. And so I was like, oh, I'll go come up with my own stories then. You know what I mean? And all right, well, I'll go do my own thing. But on the bright side, by the grace of God, ever since I remember 3rd grade, laying in my backyard, looking up at the sky and being like, oh, there's a God. It was so clear to me. And I remember coming in from recess, I was learning about rounding. And I remember, it's so funny the way you think as a little kid. I remember just thinking God knows everything. He knew how to do rounding. You know what I mean? This thing I'm struggling with, he really knows how to do it. So I always kind of believe in God, always believe the Bible. I thought it was like the holy, it was the Holy Bible. And you're supposed to believe it. So on the bright side, I never had animosity towards Christianity. Nobody was just telling me what to believe. And so I was like, all right, I'll try to do it. And then, so I started going to Young Life, if you've ever heard of that. It's kind of a high school ministry. And the best thing about Young Life is they actually got me reading the Bible, which was probably what drove my question to meet with the priest and ask him about these stories and stuff like that.
Right, yeah. When you were preaching back then, I feel like there was a broader cultural expectation of just the level of discourse and debate was much more toned down back in 2000.
Yeah, totally. And it was... to be honest, it's kind of interesting now, and maybe I was just too young to really pick it up. I felt like kind of Bush and 9/11 was kind of the major wedge, like the kind of a wedge that began to fall. And part of it was I was living in New York under the Bush administration, and he was a Nazi at the time, and and I started to hear the rhetoric ramp up with Bush. And so, but me being on campus at that time, you would get some pretty good raucous meetings, but you didn't have the same underlying, I felt like, vitriol that you do now. You know what I mean? You definitely have people who disagreed with you. But even things like homosexuality, people it was almost like most people were still kind of maybe thought it was weird, at least weird. You know what I mean? If nothing else, was that maybe don't pick on them, but
something's wrong with them.
Yeah, something's wrong. And they kind of can't help it. It's kind of like kind of like a special needs kid. You're kind of like, yeah, you can't pick on him. You know what I mean? He's got special needs. And so that's how I felt like the debate was on campus. You know what I mean? So you don't bring it up, you don't pick on them, and but you didn't have an underlying. Everything was you're a Nazi, you're a fascist, you're hateful. That just wasn't there. So
how is that? I mean, you've been preaching since 2010. What was kind of the split in 2001 between?
It was mainly political, but your Overton window was much smaller between, you just had Bill Clinton, who's basically Donald Trump, you know what I mean? And now the Republicans love Donald Trump, or some do. And so you kind of have, the Overton window was just kind of tighter. And I felt most of actually what I debated back then, which almost doesn't exist today, is much more almost like a straight up atheism. And even evolution was a bigger issue back then. And I don't feel like I ever debate atheism or evolution today. And so that would have been like the bigger, science, and that would have been the big issue.
Why don't you, that's really odd.
Yeah.
There's no more atheism.
It's you kind of had the rise of the new atheist, I felt like. So about a decade ago, Hitchens, Sam Harris, Dawkins, and I think it was a guy named Daniel Dennett. They're kind of called the four horsemen of the apocalypse, atheistic apocalypse, or whatever it was. But they were like the four horsemen of atheism, and they were really going after religion. And part of that was a little bit of a response to 9/11. So 9/11 happens, religion poisons everything, these radical religious extremists attacked. And if we were all just secular, became atheistic, we wouldn't have these problems. And so they came in like a flood, and there was tons of atheism that I would interact with 10 years ago. Even campus, there were tons of atheistic, agnostic campus groups. I don't bump into them anymore. I don't know if they exist. I don't know if they waste their time. So it's kind of funny. I remember years ago, I misheard the guy. I was at Washington State, and there was a guy who I kind of became friendly with, who was the president of the Secular Cougars, or Secular Cougs, over at Washington State. And the first time he said it, I thought he said the Secular Kooks. So I started calling them the Secular Kooks. and it just kind of became fun from there. It's like, oh, well, the Secular Kooks are here. And but yeah, so that doesn't really exist anymore. Obviously, you still have like an atheist here or there, but in the same level of debate that was going on 10 years ago or even 20 years ago, and that kind of ties in. And part of it might be the way I speak. I don't feel like I ever debate evolution on campus. So yeah, and why exactly that is, there's a little element where the new atheism died out. I think most people, you can't live in atheism, or you end up turning towards communism or socialism, or you need some sort of religion. You need some sort of goal that you're living for. You just can't live in a totally meaningless society.
Right.
At some level, people can individually, but I don't think you can corporately. And so I think there's even like a small influx of, I remember Nashville opening up like kind of like secular churches where like you'd come and, sing, Woody Guthrie songs or something like that. And you try to have like this community through that. So you need community. You're made to be with other people. So I just don't think it's sustainable long term.
Do you think they're still around, or?
I think they are. I think the main thing I've noticed, I guess the only way I can kind of think about it is my main debate now with people is everyone's become therapeutic. So that you've had a much bigger therapeutic turn. So that when people are asking me questions about God, they're willing to grant that God exists, but it's much more of a question, well, is he good? Because ABC happened to me when I was growing up. Right. Where was God during that time? And so it's almost like, and so maybe the objection has just been settled into the problem of evil much more than a straight up atheism. They just kind of maybe camp out. Yeah. And so like, because again, every now and then I will interact with an actual atheist, but it's kind of funny. It's kind of like, I forget what this debate is like, because I just don't do it any day.
Yeah.
Right? So, yeah, so I would say that's probably the main pivot I've seen in the last 10 years, as far as you don't have that blatant atheism. You may have had it a quarter century ago. Atheism, God, and evolution were definitely bigger quarter of a century ago, and I don't feel like I interact with those.
Are these people believing in some sort of other deity or some sort of other religion? I mean, you mentioned a little bit of move to Marxism, but
yeah, I think it's kind of, this term's kind of overused, but it's almost like a lot of young white people, if they apostatize, they turn towards like BLM. They turn,
and I mean, true of black people too. I mean, it's just kind of a religious thing.
Yeah. So you still stuff it with a new.
It's different for white and black people.
Yeah, but it's a new you kind of have a new evangelical cause. Like the problem's white supremacy. So here's now original sin is the white power structures, and we're going to reorient the power structures. And so that's probably the main thing I've noticed as young people have departed from the church, departed from the faith. They're usually zealous for some sort of social cause. Yeah. And I would say the Summer of Floyd obviously plays a huge role in that. I would see a huge spike of apostasy coming out of the Summer of Floyd, where people get into that and they end up leaving the church because the church is racist or whatever it is, and blah, blah, blah. And so they go into other directions. And so I think it's mainly, so maybe it's just more of maybe like a settled atheism. I'm not sure. I'm thinking through it for the first time because it's not like it's not even like I think they're thinking in terms of there's no God. It's just, we just have these egalitarian values of whites and blacks and men and women, homosexuals, transgenders, and now egalitarianism is kind of the de facto, I guess if I was to sum it up, is the de facto God for these people.
It's like we realize that we do actually need to have some sort of exterior cause or something outside of ourselves that we are fighting for and surrender to.
Yeah. And even morality. Yeah. So, and you need that. Yeah. So you need your values of egalitarianism and diversity, inclusion, equity, justice. You know what I mean? So, and you need to live for something. You just can't not do that.
Yeah, right.
So,
Which also makes sense of why they're fighting so hard
mhm.
is because you know you don't want your God to be disproven.
Yeah,
Right.
yeah, it's a new fundamentalism. It is, yeah, it is a. That's why I kind of when I'm poking them on campus, I'm like, you guys are just fundamentalists. Like you haven't thought through why you believe what you believe. It's like you show up to a church and someone questions the Bible and the church doesn't know how to respond.
Yeah.
I show up and question your beliefs and you guys don't know how to respond. And then get out of here. You know, because it is a type of fundamentalism. You've just been given equality. So like one of the things I try to get my crowd on is like, here we are at such and such university, and most of them would still kind of accept evolution. They just don't debate for it. I would say, so here we are at such and such university, and you know, most of you go to your classroom, you talk about evolution and survival of the fittest. Then you guys want to come out here and talk about equality. And I was like, well, there's no place for equality in Darwin's theory of evolution. And I was like, just look around this campus. Some people are taller, shorter, and some people are more superior than others. And that's usually like, how dare you say something? Because what they end up hearing is I'm a white guy saying I'm a superior to everybody, or I'm a guy superior to women, sort of thing. But that's the thing that kind of draws them out, was you kind of have to attack their idol. And their idol is either the two things I'll go after is diversity or equality. That's what you kind of have to poke at. So.
What do you know, like what percentage of these people grew up in the church and then went apostate because of the lack of ability, because the church didn't have the arguments for why it existed or why God was real?
I don't have any strict numbers. I would say, like, anecdotally, I feel like 60% of the kids I interact with who've gone that route have the number of kids who say, I grew up with all of this, but I've now left. Like, yeah, and it's usually some story of abuse in the church or somebody in the church letting them down, sort of thing. And at some level, if you've been in the church, I've been in the church 30 plus years in my adulthood, that you're just kind of like, yeah, tons of people have let me down. You know what I mean? Like some of the worst people have been interacted within the church. You know?
Right.
And part of it is that's where a lot of my context is.
Yeah.
But therefore, it doesn't negate Jesus. Jesus even warns there's wolves in sheep's clothing. So I have a context to help orient why there are bad people in the church. And I don't think a lot of churches even prep for that or even willing to totally acknowledge it. Like, so yeah, I think it's a little bit of a both end problem. Like if dad's a moral monster and the kids grow up with a bad home and you're talking to them about, like, I don't really want to be a parent. You're kind of like, oh, well, I can see that. You know what I mean?
Right.
But just because dad was that way doesn't mean that
it does make it harder for the kids, though. Because
Yeah.
that's a really tough thing to grow up with a dad who, I mean, the Bible's pretty clear that the dad is like mimics Christ.
Mhm.
And if the dad is angry and, not thinking logically or clearly and not defending his household, it's a bad look, but it's not a look.
Yeah. And it makes perfect sense. So if dad is at some level, him worshiping God, and especially if he's claiming to be a believer, because like one of the things I'll have to talk about on campus is if you're worshiping God, you'll become like him. And so God's slow to anger and abounding in steadfast love. And I'll even make a comment. So if your dad ever has come home, he's just flying off the handle, it's because the reality is he's not worshiping God, because God's slow to anger and he abounds in steadfast love. And so, as a child, I was able to rejoice when my dad would come home rather than be cowering in a corner, because it's like walking on eggshells. And you become loving, you become merciful, but you do also learn to hate the things that he hates and things like that. And that's even, we can get into it a little bit, but that's actually been one of the pivots I found being helpful in evangelism, is actually just spending more time preaching on the family and going directly after what a man is, what a woman is, what a father's supposed to be doing, what a wife's supposed to be doing. And in some ways it's more controversial because we have this feminist egalitarian culture, but at the same time, there's something internally satisfying for when people hear it. You know what I mean? It's almost like, that's the way it's supposed to be.
Right.
So there's something satisfying to it.
A longing for a world that they know should have existed but didn't grow up in.
Exactly.
And is that something that you've seen recently, or has this kind of just been a gradual movement?
I think it's probably something I realize it may have been there well before, because before I even started getting into it, like the rise of Jordan Peterson, it indicates some level of that reality. He became a father to many people that these people didn't have. But for me, the day, and I think when I set out to preach, I was way too, I guess like the fancy term would just be enlightenment. I was almost like the guy, we just throw on white lab coats, we just look at the facts, we come to conclusions. And I was kind of negating all the human emotion that goes into why people believe what they believe. And I thought if I just go up and make rational arguments, everyone will just have to submit. So I think some of it was like an error on my part of what evangelism looked like, what preaching looked like, and what I wanted to accomplish, because even one of the things I really wanted to abstain from was any appearance of emotional manipulation. Yeah.
Right.
And so I just
Yeah.
wanted to be
Right.
very cold, logical, reasonable. So that way I'm not appearing like, oh, because we've all seen like the preacher try to emote and get people's
Yeah.
emotion.
Right.
And so I wanted to avoid that. And so
That's always frustrating for me watching because I'm sure it's frustrating for a lot of other people as well. Of like, no, you're representing this wrong because you are just you're fighting fire with fire. It's not going to work.
And so, yeah, I didn't want to be this emotional, like try to be emotionally manipulative or anything like that. But the day that kind of pivoted for me, and I just started spending more time going direct after the family. So coming out of COVID, it was almost like all the kids were just caged up animals and it was chaos. And I kind of thought for a little bit, I was like, do I have to do something else? Like we would have huge crowds. They'd come in by the hundreds, but like, all they knew, they wanted me dead. You know what I mean? Like they couldn't hear a thing I said.
Yeah.
It was just like, you're an effing white male. It was coming out of
Yeah.
Floyd. You're an effing white male. You have a Bible. So Christians, white man, I'm just the oppressor.
Right.
I just embody oppression. And which was made the days fun in the sense if you're just out there for a street fight.
It's entertaining.
Yeah. And but then you're like, do I have to do something else? Because it's not, I don't think it's fruitful. Like it's kind of fun to be
No.
out there for 5-6 hours and just have a huge crowd. But you're like, they're so emotionally pent up. And the day it kind of pivoted for me. So 2000, I basically sat out because schools weren't open and I just, and not a lot was open. So I just sit around and
Like
read a lot.
2020.
Yeah, 2020. Yeah. And then in 21 is when things picked up. Started getting a little, it was a little chaotic. I actually got arrested at Boise State. I was preaching, had a huge crowd. And they're like, we can't carry out normal school activities, so we ask you to shut it down. I was like, okay, I'll gladly shut it down. But I'm going to sit in my chair and talk to a smaller group of people. They're like, no, we want you off. And I was like, then I don't think it has anything to do with my normal school activities.
Yeah.
It's my content. So I'm going to stay put. And then the police showed up and whisked me away. I was like, all right, I guess I'm leaving.
Well, I guess goodbye.
All right, good night, everybody. I got to go. But a year later, 2022, I'm preaching in Lawrence, Kansas. And there's a girl with, I can't remember if it was green or blue hair, but she had her colored hair and she was giving me the business. It was like a gnat. And I was trying to be, in my head, I thought I was being like nuanced and sympathetic, trying to hear her out. But she just kept raising, to me, just like foolish objections. It was driving me nuts. It was like a gnat at my ear. I was like, just go away. And finally, the thing that helped was she said, the Bible's unjust because you can stone an adulterer. And I just said, you know what? I think it's a great thing you can stone an adulterer. Think of what an adulterer does. Rips apart his wife and kids, rips apart another family, and our whole social order suffers because he's selfish. He should be put to death. And she shut up and sat down and listened for the next 2 hours. I was kind of like, all right, dad was probably an adulterer.
Something's happened here.
Yeah, dad was probably an adulterer. And hence, I somehow am being yoked with her dad. Maybe her dad was a professing believer. Now she's sitting down listening for the next 2 hours. And shortly thereafter, the other thing was a little bit funny. A girl was sitting there and she goes, oh, you think you're such a man standing out here, blah, blah, in our patriarchal system and all that. And I was like, but we are in a patriarchal system. You know it. I know it. That's why I joke about girls on college campuses having daddy issues and why 70% of our men in jail come from fatherless homes. And so dad's either healthy or he's unhealthy. I'm just saying dad needs to be healthy. And the way that's done is by worshiping Christ. And I remember just tons of people applauding on the steps and just being like, all right, that's what I'm going after. You know what I mean? And that's what I'm, so Jed with the whole fire, I was like, okay, family, that's what people are responding on. So I'm going to kind of go after that and try to set the framework for Christian belief.
I wonder how much of the current problems we're seeing in college is just bitterness.
Total bitterness. Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. It's bitterness abounds. Everybody is so bitter. Yeah, and some of it's through no fault of their own. A lot of it's like failed expectations. I think that's even one of the things like with the rise of the therapeutic, you should never be hurt in any way. You know what I mean?
Right,
And so once you are hurt, all you can do is kind of be bitter. I think when there is abuse and then you become a victim, a survivor, and that becomes like your chief identity at that point going forward, I think that kind of helps anchor you into bitterness. And so I think the therapeutic is actually more damaging long term. I think it's creating more bitterness in people rather than freedom. It's creating a lot of resentment. And, there are a lot of things in the world. Like we're Christians. We understand that there's a lot of sin in the world. There's a lot of things to be bitter over and a lot of things to be angry over. But the question is like, how are you anchored in it? So you have Joseph sold into slavery by his brothers and, he did drag it out with them and, brought them to he gave them a lot of emotional turmoil before he revealed himself, but he was able to step back at the end and say, you meant it for evil, but God meant it for good. And when evil happens to you, do you have to turn bitter or can you look to the gospel and look to what Christ is doing and be like, oh, there's hope amidst this. My suffering is not superfluous. It's redemptive. It's meaningful. There's purpose behind it. And I think when you're in a secular order where there really is no purpose and people are just hurting you, your only option is really turn bitter or pretend it's not happening. You know what I mean?
Right.
So
And there's no purpose beyond your own satisfaction and life enjoyment. And if you are suffering, it's not as enjoyable.
yeah, life's not enjoyable, and we are kind of, and even some of the worst of us in our culture, we do kind of have a, you spent some time in Africa. We have a pretty good, we have it pretty good, even if you're,
Oh, yeah.
even if you're not, the top 10% of American culture, you still have it pretty good. And that's even part of the difficulty is because we have so much that's good. There was a comedian, he kind of got canceled, Louis C.K., but he was on Conan O'Brien one time, and he's talking about everything's so amazing and everyone's miserable. And the thing he kind of talked about is he was taking a plane. He was like, I just found out they have internet. I didn't know this thing existed 5 minutes ago. We get on the plane, we go to fly across the country, the internet shuts down, and the guy next to me is like, "Oh, this is BS." And he's just like, something you didn't know existed 5 minutes ago now owes you something.
Yeah.
And it's like that idea that, oh yeah, of course I'm entitled to Wi-Fi as I fly across the country. And he ends up saying, 150 years ago, they'd hop on a carriage, babies are being born, people are dying.
Yeah.
And you start off in New York, you end up in LA, and you have a totally different group of people across the country. Now I hop on a plane, watch a movie, and I'm across the country.
And my Wi-Fi doesn't work, and man, I'm frustrated.
Yeah. And now you're angry. So, I think that expectation of like, how do we live in a kind of a luxurious environment, when you still have the fundamental problem of morality and values. So.
And the problem isn't the wealth, but I think that one of America's big problems right now is Jeshurun waxed fat and kicked.
Mm-hmm.
And that's playing out on the college campuses too, of like everything has to be perfect and equal. For some unknown reason, that seems to be their big cause.
Yeah. But yeah, and it's like, and you're kind of America at a certain level is victim of its success. So like, we create a lot of healthcare, but not everybody has it equally. So that's
right.
It's not like these other nations, not like China, these other nations are producing healthcare. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So it's like even like this idea of creating wealth. And so, okay, well, how do we get more wealth to other people? And, I'm a capitalist, so I was like, yeah, we need to increase our capital sort of thing. But it's, I think oftentimes when if you just look at you're like, okay, you have $100,000, I have $1,000. Well, if you just give me 59,000, or 49,000, then suddenly we're equal and everyone's going to be happy. Right. But it kind of fails of how you got to your 100,000. Why, maybe it's through no circumstances of my own, or maybe I just don't know how to spend money well and manage my money. Right. So I'm at $1,000, and somehow that's unfair to the rest of society. And much this bit off tangent, but it's interesting. Like, if you listen to certain leftists where they even want to take children out of homes because you have a privileged position being around your parents with a certain education. Yeah. They're using words like, I remember talking to somebody once where, say your average white home is using a vocabulary of 1,000 words, but in your average black home, they're using a vocabulary of 500 words. And so they want to say, those children are at a disadvantage now. So what we need to do is take everybody out of their homes. Right. So everybody kind of has an equal vocabulary, and it just kind of fails to understand the nature of reality.
And there's a weird, like, if therapeutic goo is the ideal, and your perfect life is you have to be happy. Mm-hmm. All the time, the focus on happy.
Yeah.
Then it makes sense that you would not want other people to be happier, because there's also a level of envy in there.
Resentment takes over. Yeah, envy, resentment. And when you're, as Christians, again, we want joy, we want happiness.
Right.
But the average secular man is not thinking happy are the poor in spirit, or blessed are the poor in spirit. And Jesus comes along, blessed are the poor in spirit, for there is the kingdom of God. And and so anyway, that's even part of calling people to repentance, is reorienting their understanding of what does it mean to be a human being? You know what I mean? And what world are we in that? And I think the Christian is in a privileged position, because we're in a place where we have the reality of, like, we're in a fallen world. And so when I'm sad or my life is not going the way I want it dialed up, like, some of it is out of my control. You know what I mean? You just read Ecclesiastes, read the book of Job, and oftentimes life's just miserable. And the question is, can you be oriented in it? And another little side, like the last few weeks, I lead a Bible study on Wednesday nights, and last few months going through Hebrews. Hebrews is all about suffering. So here are these new people being children of God, entering into the new covenant, and yet they're suffering. Their possessions are being stolen and everything else. It's like, all right, are we really God's people? Because look at all the suffering. And now we're doing 1 Peter, which is also all about suffering. And so, the Christian life can often just be about suffering.
Yeah, right. And there's a weird belief that, like, you can live a life without suffering.
Mm-hmm.
Or the only suffering that you will have is the suffering that gets you to whatever your perfect life is. I suffer, I start a company where I work really hard. It's,
Mm-hmm.
I don't have a great social life. I don't get to eat fancy for a long time. But then at the end of it, there's my physical reward of a nice car.
Yeah.
Is the Christian view is you can suffer for your entire life,
Mm-hmm.
but the reward is not here. It's
Yeah.
in heaven, and it's much better than a nice car.
Yeah. And if you're in Africa, if you're a Christian in Africa, Christian in China, Christian in other parts of the world, or even secular man in other parts of the world, I think you kind of walk away with a little bit of a different understanding. So the interesting thing, I do think in many ways our culture, as we talked about a little bit earlier, is we're really just apostatizing from the gospel. So we have some sense of glory, we have some sense of what humans should be and where we ought to be, while missing the tension between kind of like the fancy theologies, the already not yet, and yeah. So I think secular man kind of wants to take Christianity, bring it all to the present. Johnny Cash has a line in a song where he says, "They say they want the kingdom, but they don't want God in it." That's basically, I think, where men and women are bitter.
the cultural Christian. I mean, that's what Richard Dawkins went viral for
Mhm.
like last year. He was like, I actually do like England. I like Oxford, and I like the world that the West has built, the world that Christianity built.
Yeah.
I don't like Christianity, but I'm sure a big fan of like these lovely paved streets and these cathedrals and our beautiful Westminster halls and right, all of that. But unfortunately for him, it comes with Christianity.
Yeah.
Of necessity.
Yeah, and I remember, him saying I'm a cultural Christian, and
Yeah.
and there's been a small spike of people saying that, and I have seen actually more conversions recently. Can't remember the one woman's name. I want to say she's at Stanford, but she was converted. A woman named Louise Perry.
Yeah.
She was recently converted, and I've read her book, The Case Against the Sexual Revolution, and it's a really good book. I remember reading it, being like, "How is this woman not a Christian?" And
Right.
apparently over the summer, I saw a brief video where she's like, I saw that it was sociologically true, so it must be metaphysically true." And so she's like, "Yeah, so I now identify as a Christian," sort of thing. So, yeah. So, and hopefully more people are waking up to that. Even my experience this past semester, I think more people are waking up to like, we need something else. Like, yeah, I think kind of the bankruptcy of the new atheism we talked about a little bit. They need something else, and I think most people are starting to realize that. The question is, what is it? What's the way forward? So
Yeah, because this pain won't last forever. It was the same thing with COVID, and the same thing with like Charlie Kirk's death. It's the people forget very, very easily.
really quick, yeah.
That's kind of been our big problem forever, is that we forget the pain.
Yeah, and we're more hyper. I feel like it's more hyper than like when I was growing up. Like something happened. At least 9/11, I remember it being a big deal for 3 or 4 years. Now something happens. It's like Charlie Kirk's death. It still lingers. But yeah, you just kind of feel like you had that CEO that was assassinated a year ago. It's kind of like out of the news. And you had the politicians in Minnesota. That's kind of just boom, boom, boom. It's just like a new thing, a new wave, and yeah. So yeah, we're just in odd times.
We are in odd times. I wonder if part of the reason for all of this envy is because there's the underlying structure of America, or the underlying belief is that you can go from 0 to 100. You can start in the poorest of poor and end up being extremely wealthy.
Yeah.
And so a lot of people are envious that they aren't there yet. Whereas something like Britain, there's a class structure, and so you start off as a tradesman, your dad is a plumber, and you finish as a plumber, and you're actually totally okay with that. And you like, all right, I did my job. I was a good plumber.
Yeah.
A sense of duty that we don't have here in America.
Yeah, zero sense of duty of towards anybody or anything. And and so I don't know how you write it, because it's going to take a generation or two to embed people back into a reality that's kind of, we've all been kind of like deracinated in a way, kind of been upended in like religious beliefs, social structures. I think even 2020, we've lost confidence. Like nobody, like it's even one of the things way off script here, but that people have just lost all confidence in almost all institutions at this point. And so, and 2020 was a huge part of that. And so now people are looking for new institutions, looking for new religions, even a little bit like a influx towards Roman Catholicism, Eastern Orthodoxy. And I think it's just kind of like the broad, nothing stable. And you can look at, here are two groups that at least have the appearance of being 2,000 years old. So if I yoke with them, I'm at least part of something stable where everything else is unstable in reality. So.
Yeah, the aesthetics are great, right?
Yeah.
And it looks sturdy.
And
everything else doesn't.
And your options are, a pop evangelical church
Right.
or an aesthetic EO church or Roman Catholic church. Like, all right, I'm going to go that way. So
Yeah. Have you since 2020, maybe it's a little farther than that, have you seen that institutional the fear of the awkwardness of the institutions from students on the campus, or is this kind of
only more kind of your right wing type students.
Okay.
I feel like the left wing kids I feel like I interact with, I feel like they are still confident they can get the institutions, take over the institutions, and get back. The right wing kids I interact with, I feel like they are a little bit of a almost nihilist, like we need to burn them all down, we need new ones. And it was interesting. It was actually 2016 for me. The right wing kids. And what was interesting to me was, it was a predominantly, so like this alt-right thing that kind of popped up in 16. To me, it was a West Coast phenomenon. Like they may have been in other parts of the country, but if I would go from Washington, Oregon, California and preach, I would interact with so many kids who were like hardcore anti-Semitic. They were, already suspicious of the racial thing. They were tired of homosexuals, and a big part of that was they're growing up in a school environment that you're either a fascist or you're LGBTQ, all these things. And they're like, well, I'll just be a fascist. You know what I mean? So they just kind of swallowed it. Like, oh, these are my two options. All right, give me fascism then. And they're able to go. I remember preaching in Southern California one time. I finished up my day and I'm walking off campus and this kid's like, hey, you're one of us? I was like, who's us? And he was a fascist. I was like, no, I'm not. I'm not one of you.
I'm actually in the middle, which is not a fascist and not a gay person.
Yeah. And he asked, he's like, but you took on communism, feminism. I was like, yeah, because I'm a Christian. I was like, that. Your options to take them on isn't fascism. Christianity, following Jesus, is a way to take on the communists and feminism. And we ended up spending about an hour. We just sat there at the end of the day. I was sitting on campus and we spoke for about an hour of why you should, Jesus addresses all these things and you need to follow Jesus, not some other dictatorial thing. But it was, that was a West Coast predominantly that I felt like I interacted with it, where I can think of very vivid conversations with men in Oregon, Washington, and California. And so those, I feel like it's a bit more of a right wing thing right now. And so, and even as you might see a little bit as guys swing right, and then there's like no enemies to the right, and so they swing and so if you're a guy who's like, we're gonna punch in all directions, and it's like, oh, your institution's bad. And so it's kind of like, but it's I just see it as part of the same thing. Guys are looking for grounding, they're looking for standing, and how do we get there? And I think if we really just sit down. And here's the hard part is like, I want to just say, I just want to believe the Bible. And like when you do have things where like what's going on in Galatia with Peter and the Jews and Paul and him rebuking them, and all those sorts of things going on. So within that, as Christians, we can step back. We're reformed, so we can think there's institutional problems. Right. And what we broadly want to do is reform what's there. We're not revolutionaries. And so what we want to do is expound the scriptures, preach those things, and reform what's there rather than necessarily blow up everything. And I just kind of feel like a lot of people, I feel like the left still feels like they have the institutions. The hardcore socialist kids I meet on campus, they're fine with burning everything down. Like your Antifa, your more Antifa vibe, burning all down. Then you kind of have your right wing kids who are a little bit like, all those institutions are bad. They need to come down too. So
have you noticed an uptick in anger, especially among right wing people?
Not tons on campus. Outside of campus, I would say I feel like there's a bottom line anger. And it's just resentment, kind of similar moral issues. But on campus, I feel like most of the anger that I see is your left wing kids, like your Antifa, your trans. And I kind of yoke those two things together. So in my head, like if I show up on a campus and there's kind of an Antifa vibe, it's always like misfit trans kids. And even I was at Missouri a few weeks ago, and you had this table there for the Young Democratic Socialist Party or whatever it was, and you're like, they're all just freaks. You know what I mean? I'm not trying to be mean and saying that, but you're just like, they're all dorks. And
like you would not hire these people.
Yeah, they're not hireable, and they had a rough time in high school. They're probably bullied, and so they're like, hey, let's just take these outlying beliefs, and from there, if we can burn all this down, we can put ourselves in positions of power, and we can. The whole system's unjust because we're being rejected by it, and so. I think the whole, and I guess you're kind of seeing it with the right and the left as the divide gets bigger, which I didn't, your Democrats and Republicans in my head, it started to grow bigger, the bigger gap in the early 2000s. And then it's just kind of with the rise of Trump, it's just accelerated. And I just think everybody, there is this broad, like, I'm not saying anything new, is you just feel like there's a lot of distrust, a lot of anger, And yeah, and from there, everybody just wants power because like people are done with kind of with principles. Like, we just want to get where we want to go. I remember talking to some college Republicans on a campus in California, and they're like, we don't care about like not principles like. So oftentimes when you hear these Republicans argue, like you'll have some libertarian guy like, oh, well, the Constitution says, it's almost like no one cares about the Constitution at this point.
Yeah.
It's a very symbolic document. And it's like, I don't care what the powers of the president are or aren't. I just want X accomplished. And
Right.
if we have to bypass everything in the Constitution to get there, let's do it. So I remember having discussions with some guys. This was probably 2017 in California, the college Republicans on a campus there. So I just think that's where most people are at this point. It's like, forget principles. We're now at the place of politics. The ends justifies the means. Let's just get where we want to go.
Is there anyone that wants to save the institutions?
The closest thing would be like maybe like your Charlie Kirk type guy. You know what I mean? I felt like he was a bit in that camp,
but he was more like, we want to save the people at the institutions, as opposed to I want to save Stanford, and I want to we want to keep Stanford, we want to keep Harvard, we want to keep Yale around, but we want them to not be lunatics.
Yeah, and he would kind of think if we just restored the America,
if we restored the young kids at these college institutions, potentially,
back to like this American ideal. And so he was still. I feel like a lot of people have given up on that. You know what I mean? Like this, that there is some. Even like the left has spent so much time deconstructing the founding fathers and stuff like that.
Yeah, right.
And even like, so young people are either like, all right, fine, I'll be a racist with them. Or it's like, well, fine, we just want new structures. And so I do kind of, in my head, it's, you don't have tons of people, I feel like, who just want to conserve what's actually there or even reform what's there. I feel like most people are kind of like, the jig is up. We're like it's almost like we're at the expiration date of the American system is how I feel, and you have two people finally like how are we going to define what's going forward.
Is there anyone that wants to redeem the actual colleges themselves and keep them from being destroyed?
Most people, I think, realize, like, Charlie Kirk gets picked on for calling college a scam. A scam, that's what. And I think if you're there, you're like, it is a scam. So I go to these campuses and like they're always building new, beautiful buildings, millions and millions, billions perhaps of dollars are being dumped into them. And you're like, what are they actually really producing? And I think like most people are like your hard sciences are kind of like legitimate things. But when you show up there and, one of the things I'll debate out there is queer theory, and like especially in the spring, that's how I'd get my crowd. Is I would not address the LGBT. I would just go after the Q. I was like, because here we are, the Q. Because if you accept the Q, you kind of get rid of lesbians, gays, bisexuals, because those don't really exist anymore. Because the queering is the eradication of everything. Like nothing, there are no norms. And so one of the things that they would kind of set forth, and this kind of ties into like some postmodern thought, is like, the homosexual doesn't actually exist. That's like one of the things they debate in queer theory is the homosexual exist. And so like historically you would have just had acts. Like in Christianity, we'll just say, well, that guy is sodomizing that guy.
Yeah.
But that doesn't make you a homosexual in the sense that you have this fixed identity. Like I am a male. The queerest say I can become female. And so just as I am, there's no fixedness to my maleness. There's no fixedness to my maleness that now therefore makes me a homosexual. And so in queer theory, homosexuals don't exist anymore. So when you have the rise of the Q taking over everything, nobody wants to fund that education. So I think there are plenty of things within it that are a scam, and yet the reason they exist is because they're taxpayer subsidized, and they're having millions or billions of dollars being dumped into these programs that I would say are intellectually, emotionally, psychologically just totally bankrupt. And they can only exist at a taxpayer funded institution because nobody on the free market. And within that, I'm pretty radically free market. I'm maybe not as much because there are things I think sometimes might need to be. I'm fine with maybe subsidizing good pianists. I don't know, like if the market doesn't want them, I kind of want good pianists to be around. I want classical music to be around. So like maybe I'm a little contradictory here, and that's fine. But I would just say that's probably one of the things I've seen the most is I think a lot of people realize that the jig is up, even on the college campuses, but so much money is dumped in there and there's so much invested that I think it's hard for people to throw in the towel and be like, yeah, we need a...
Right, because it turns out that people in finance actually are very uninterested in hiring people with a PhD in queer theory. Mm-hmm. They're just shockingly useless.
Yeah. And what are they going to do? Come in and talk about the oppression of the numbers and all that sort of stuff? You know what I mean? So if anything, they're just going to be an acid to your team. You know what I mean? Because everything's going to be somehow somebody's privilege, someone's bigotry, hatred, and all that sort of stuff. And once you get into that lens, it really does just distort everything. It becomes a universal acid. So
100%. I feel like if those kinds of studies, those parts of the universities were removed, it would go a long way towards making college something that was actually respected again.
Yeah, because and I think the bottom line, and even when I'm trying to argue on campus every day, is these hard. One of the good things with the hard sciences and all that sort of stuff, you realize there's a real world out there. It's not all socially constructed, and so for your average left wing ideal is that everything is radically socially constructed. And I've been told numerous times that I just can't wait for your type to die off, because if I was dead, then we could play a different game. So like, I want to play American football, they want to play European football, and as long as we're playing American football, they're not getting their ideal European game, and so that affects the whole social order. But once we die out, or we can get rid of the white Christian man particularly, then we can have a better social order. Even a few weeks ago, Hillary made a comment very similar along those lines. She was doing an interview, and she's like, oh, people of a certain race, certain religious persuasion, they've just created a lot of problems. And it was basically the right Christian man has created a lot of these problems. 100%. And so even at her rate, someone at her level is willing to articulate that. Like this Mondami guy who's running in, is that his name? I think that's right. In New York.
Zoran Mamdani.
Yeah.
Mamdani. If I can't pronounce your name, I don't know. Which is why I can't ever run for office. But
even if I was to say, oh, well, people of his race and his religion have created a lot of problems. The fear is, Islamophobia. You can say whatever you want against Christians. So I think what that does, what the sciences do, and most of college education outside of these queer theories, is it gets you away from the socially constructed reality, and you are dealing with a real world that presses down upon you. And the minute that happens, I do think you're going to be driven back to God. That the minute, and that's basically my argument every day on campus. It's like you have one or two options. Either there's a logical world, a moral world, and a world with justice, or you just have all these things are totally meaningless, and we just don't know anything. And we just call something justice, but we don't know it's actually just.
Right.
We call something logical, we don't know it's actually logical. But if there is this thing called logic, that's universal, it applies to your mind, my mind, the Chinese mind, the African mind, I think we're being driven back to a place where there is a mind backing the cosmos. I would obviously say that mind is God. And so there is a personal being back in the universe. Why is there moral good? Why is there justice? Because there's a personal being back in the universe who's structured the world. And when you violate his norms and his character, then you're engaged in injustice and stuff like that. So, but I think the minute you reject God, the world's just Play-Doh, and we can move it around any way we want. And that's the thing that's kind of interesting, but all you can do is rage. And that's even just emotionally, psychologically, kind of tied into some of the things we've talked about, is I'm trying to tell these guys, like, all you can do, if you accept that, all you can do is hate everyone around you and rage, because the world's not conforming to your desires, and actually creates you to be self-righteous. Because you sit there, you look at the world, you're like every tyrant that has ever existed. You look at the world and say, if the world would just submit to me, it'd be perfect. I was like, how self-righteous do you have to be to draw that conclusion? And then from there, to also think that you meet that. Whereas as Christians, we preach a righteousness from God. We also realize that we violate it, so we realize we're sinners. And so the antithesis of Christianity is self-righteousness, but inherent to unbelieving thought is actually self-righteousness. So they'll often want to accuse us of being self-righteous because we do preach a moral law, and yet they fail to realize, no, you guys are actually preaching a moral law, and you're actually more absolutist, or you kind of have a world without grace. You're, in a sense, you're more absolutist than the Christian, and you think you're the one who's invented it. So that's where the real rub is, and that's one of the things I try to press down every day. And I was actually with a guy who was up in Vermont a few weeks ago preaching. I was actually literally telling that there was three of us. We were having a cup of coffee at the end of the day, and he was a cutter. And he was, because one of the things we're talking about trans, and I make a comment to the effect of the trans people. I was like, if someone's cutting themselves, we know something's deeply wrong. Yeah. But if I cut off my boobs and my penis, you guys are like, oh man, that's real enlightening, man.
Look at him being super smart.
Yeah, and but like if I cut my arm with a blade, you're like, something's wrong. He goes, and the guy was like, well, I cut, and then you're like, okay, now we can get rid of these issues, like, and then it gets into issues of him being abused growing up, and most of his objections about God is really he's just angry and bitter at the world. And I kind of told him that, like, you're at a place where either your suffering can either be redemptive or it's just superfluous. And if it's superfluous, you're just going to rage against the world. But if you realize that Christ was cut off for you, then you can orient your own cutting and you can be free from it. But you have to realize what Christ has done. That's the only way forward for you. And we only talked for maybe another 10 minutes after that. And yeah, he was pretty kind about it. But that's all you have is, if you are this Marxist, idealist, kind of left wing, all you can do is hate the world. Yeah. And it's never going to conform to you, because that's the thing. it's never going to be what you want it to be because the world's not the way that you think it is or that it could be. You know what I mean? And that's the hard part because even as a Christian, we can look at the world and be like, you look at a family where there's abuse, you're like, oh, that's not the way it's supposed to be. So there are moral things we can go in there and address and blah, blah, blah. But for the left, it's the entire cosmos that can be reoriented. And that's where our gap is. And I think why they end up raging. So.
But these problems have existed for much longer than just the past 20 years of dads being abusive and moms being neglectful. And this has just been a thing that's been around for forever. Why is it that suddenly we've got all these people who have decided that the correct operating procedure, given those circumstances, is to start cutting themselves apart?
Yeah, I think it is interesting. So when I was growing up, and what's interesting, very broadly, is when I was in college, the thing, and I don't know if it's as common now, but so many young women were bulimics and anorexics when I was in college. So you had a physical manifestation of their ills. It was just anorexia or bulimia, which was much more hidden. And then you kind of have this. So it's almost like, especially women, particularly. There's a woman, Abigail Favale. She wrote a book called Bad Therapy, and she kind of addressed and there's women much more, especially younger women, kind of get into like a social contagion in a way that I get if you're the way young women are affected by what's going on with other women. So like if everybody's a social contagion is you go off to college and somehow lesbianism is the outlet with it. Girls go off to college who you never would have thought was a lesbian, now they're a lesbian, or they become trans.
That's like, I just want to be part of the group.
Yeah,
that's
and
just
there's some
FOMO.
sort of there's a weird there, and that's always been there. But how that manifests itself culturally is what's going to always differ. So now it's the transgenderism thing. Before it was anorexia, bulimia. I'm not sure what it was before that, but I think it's always been there. But what the cultural manifestation is, I think and how that arises, it's kind of out of my wheelhouse. But I would say that's what's always going on is the people adopting the social contagion around them at some level.
Yeah.
And the question is, what is that social contagion at that time? And I do think with the rise of the internet, somehow with gays getting into a lot of power, they've probably heavily pushed these sorts of things. And especially if you're a little bit awkward, I think, even what's her name? Rosaria Butterfield. She talks a bit about how, what's the right word? Hospitable the LGBT community was. So she was like, when we'd have these meals together, we're always hanging out together. And I think like if you're a little bit socially awkward and there are people who are very hospitable towards you and have the appearance of being very gracious to you, because it sounds like they're not going to make any judgments, but the minute you depart from there, they're pretty harsh and judgmental. But I think that's kind of what the trajectory is that they are, they've gotten power and they're able to put themselves in places that like make this look normal. So you go to your average public school classroom and just kind of seems like this is a pushed agenda. And so when people are influenced, like even when I was growing up, no little kid ever thought, or I may have thrown on my sisters may have put me in my mom's clothes once or twice. And like, I was like, I'm a woman, you know what I mean? But like never did I know a single kid growing up that really thought they were, and now it's like, just seems common. We're like, oh, that Hollywood actress, she has 3 kids. All of them think they're the other sex. Like something weird's going on. And I don't know what the cause of that is, but there's something there.
I think it's highly likely. In fact, I would be willing to bet a lot of money that that's not the kids, that's the mom.
Yeah.
You imagine that your mom had put you in your sister's clothes and I'm a girl. Yeah. And then she said it.
Yeah. And dad's not present.
Perform the operation.
And he's, dad's not present and mom's is pumping this up and it's an affirmation and love and all that sort of stuff. And so you kind of go that route.
But the gays hate I know gays hate trans people because it's the entire under the substructure of gays is like there are 2 genders and I of this certain gender like other people of this certain gender. Mm-hmm. But if you take the trans ideology, then there is no gender.
Yeah.
Everyone's an amorphous blob of goo and therefore the 2 men sodomizing each other is not something else. It's like there's no distinction, there's no identity, there's no definition in it. It's just another random act. And I know the gays hate the trans people, but it seems that they have brought on their own demise.
Yeah, and because I think there is an element where it's not sustainable because like at some point like the queering. So Gail Rubens wrote one of the foundational pieces for queer theory. It's called Thinking Sex. And she wrote this thing, I think like in 1984. And if you go home, like if you Google it, it's readily available PDF file on the internet. And like, she calls things like pedophilia intergenerational sex. And she'll say that incest is just taboo. So because if you're consistently queer, there's simply no norms other than what society imposes upon you. And 99.9% of the world, I don't think really wants to go that route. And especially once you start to have kids, it kind of ties in some element of social contagion where like you're willing to accept it and play like, how does Hitler come around and all the Germans kind of buy in? Like, how does that happen?
Yeah.
Good question. So how do a bunch of people go against reality? But I think that's one of the things that we have. So if you delve into some of the queer theory works and they're trying to figure it out, I think for most people, it's not a sustainable reality. So I do think it's got to burn itself out because it really is just death. And so it's the whole philosophy of death, and it'll have a short shelf life. And hopefully, I feel like it's kind of gasping at this point. I feel like most people have kind of, at least the Q part, the LGBT stuff is still pretty anchored in. But even something like that on campus, I remember back in 2017, 18. So for me, I was preaching at Washington State in 2016 when the transgender, prior to that, I had interacted with one trans kid on campus, and like 13 or 14 at the University of Oregon. And it was a fascinating thing with him. We kept in touch for about 6 months. But the thing was, like, when I saw him, he was very clearly a dude trying to be a girl, and like just thinning hair. He was like, 2 or 3 inches shorter than me. I probably had 40 pounds on him. So just like a weak, frail guy. But he was really kind. And I didn't even know the pronoun things existed at the time. I was like, well, and the place just started hating. And I was like, what are you guys? I legitimately, I'm not trying to be offensive. You know what I mean? I'm not trying to be some conservativist, like poking the trans. Like, who in the world's ever heard of pronouns back in 2013 or 14, whatever year it was? I definitely didn't. And I feel like I'm kind of involved in this stuff every day. And so anyway, we kept in touch. He was really kind to me. We kept in touch. And I remember him messaging me something to the effect of, the hardest part with what I've done is everything I hated about myself before, I still hate, but now I hate what I did to my body. And there's no going, there's no going back. And he even said, I can't join you because, I'll never be like you guys. But then I kind of can't leave the LGBT because then I'll have nothing. And so he realized he kind of put himself in a pickle, and sadly we haven't talked in whatever, 10 years, 12 years, whatever it's been. And, but like that, even as we think of ministry, I think that's one of the rallies that we have. We got 2 levels of this thing that like I think it is good to address the public broader push.
Yeah.
But at the same time, you have people who are hurt. I was talking to CRF the other night, and one of the ways that kind of helped shape, as I think through even evangelizing to them, I was watching this show. I was down in California, and my brother had a show on called like My 800-Pound Life or My 700-Pound Life. And there's these people who are just really, really fat, and they have to lose weight, a certain amount of weight, so they can get some sort of surgery that will like staple their stomach so they don't eat as much. But this girl who is really, really huge, she had been raped, and she just said, well, I figured if I got really fat, no one ever touched me again. And so there's a type of logic to that where you're like, okay, you could look at her and just be like, oh, it's so disgusting how fat she is. Or you could kind of recognize, oh, well, if you were sexually abused, how would you respond physically, emotionally to that? And there's a type of logic that just says, even I think similarly, the trans people I have interacted with, almost universally there was abuse. And so if my penis has made people drawn to me, and if I cut that off, or if you're a woman, you cut off your boobs, and no guy is going to probably touch you again. And so that gives you a certain level of protection. So I think even something like that has to be figured into our reality of how we're ministering to these people, because oftentimes it is like deep hurt and pain, and it's not as always open rebellion. I think you definitely have your
There's some of that.
Yeah,
some of that. If your dad didn't protect you from the monsters outside or the monsters inside or whatever it was, or you have a lot of people who it's unfortunately become a meme now of like had a relative that sexually abused them when they were young. And you see this with the rise of pedophilia. It is a natural response to be like, I want to do everything possible to run away from that. But because you're doing it without Christ, eventually a lot of these people run in a full circle back to it.
Yeah. And I even made a comment once. It was probably maybe inappropriate, but I think it was at the University of Memphis. And there was a homosexual guy opposing me. And I just made a comment. I was insinuating it without explicitly stating it. And as we're going back and forth, and I was like, and you could even forgive your dad. And he's like, forgive me. Why would you bring him up? Why would you bring him up? And you know what I mean? And it was just like, well, like I was assuming, you know what I mean, at some level, but like even that sort of reality, and I think even the good news of the gospel is even earlier in the conversation I mentioned like his status is now that that's marked his whole life, and it is. And that's even, one of the things I bring up when we're on campus is like, we all know, you guys want to treat sex as being recreational, but we all know it's not recreational. So my mom and dad told me that there was a Santa Claus growing up, and they lied to me about Santa Claus. But nobody thinks my life is totally upended because my parents lied to me. Right? But if I said, or even if they lied about other things, now, I have noticed for young people that if your dad does not keep his promise, that sort of lie is a little bit more upending. But if I was to say, my dad abused me, then everyone's like, oh my goodness. Because we all know your body is unique and distinct. And so we have this weird thing that on one level, your culture wants to say your body doesn't matter in any way. Sex is totally recreational. Sex is no big deal. But almost the high crime that could be committed is some sort of sexual violation, some sort of rape, some sort of sexual abuse. And I agree it's absolutely evil, but I just think it's one of those internal contradictions of the people that we're evangelizing is they want to say body doesn't matter almost at all, but then they all fully recognize how deep and transgressing is some sort of abuse in it. And so I think as we do evangelism and as we're talking to people about the gospel on those contexts is being keenly aware of what we're entering into is a place of deep hurt and pain. It's not just, me, if I sin. One of the things for me that really convicted me when I was more converted was I realized I had really good parents. And I was like, I can't even do the dishes without complaining. I was like, a good person. I remember I had a friend commit suicide. I was like, I want to be a good person. And I was like, the more I devoted myself to being good, I was like, I'm just not that good. And where it revealed itself was all the little things, like a good person should be able to do the dishes without complaining. That's what really stood out to me. Whereas, and I'm coming from a broad, healthy, good environment. You take someone coming from a radically upended environment. So anyway, I think as we do evangelism, we're talking on these issues and talking to these people, 9 out of 10 times the person before you is operating out of a place of deep pain and understanding that going into the conversation. And even we were talking a little bit earlier, but thinking of like points of contact with people in evangelism. There was a girl at Colorado State about a year and a half ago just haranguing me, and it was she was a lesbian. And finally, I ended up saying, "Can we just set aside the lesbian issue for a second?" I was like, "When you think of America, is it healthy?" And she's like, "No." I was like, "When you think of Colorado State University and you look around people's decisions, do you think it's healthy?" She's like, "No." I was like, "When you're laying in your bed, you're not arguing with a street preacher. Are you healthy?" She's like, "No." I was like, "Okay, now we can talk about things." You know what I mean? But all she can do is see red on the lesbian thing. So I'm like, okay, how can I shelve this? Like, there are certain times where you need to go directly after the sin that they're engaged in, and other times you got to like kind of come in the back door of like all right. You can't hear anything I'm saying because of this. And I think that's even one of the things. There is a devil and and his minions. And I do think that's one of the things he's entrenched in our society. This is my identity. And for anybody to address it in any way, shape, or form is a full frontal attack on you as a human being.
Yeah.
And what we have to do is say, no, it's not. Here's what it means to be a human being. But I think there is trying to be shrewd as serpents is coming in a back door on some of those issues where sometimes on the homosexual issue, I feel like sometimes the church is a sledgehammer, which is appropriate. Like on the bigger cultural issue. And that's kind of dance. Same thing, say with abortion. I remember being in Vermont, probably, it could have been 2019 now. And this girl, I'd preached one day, the place was total chaos. I used to have a sign that got stolen, but just said, God is love. So if a place went crazy one day, I'd show up the next day, just sit there with a God is love sign. That way be like, guys, no, I believe that God loves you.
Yeah.
So I was just sitting there with the God loves. She comes up and I was an idiot, but it took me, 30 minutes to realize, oh, well, she had an abortion. She always wanted to debate abortion with me. And I wish I did not do this. I kind of wish I would have picked up on it from the very beginning and just went after, like, I do think a girl like that who's fighting so hard for her justification of why she had an abortion, I would in hindsight, I would pivot and probably just be much more full on gracious to her rather than even debate abortion. She knows she murdered her child. That's why she's arguing with the street preacher with a God is love sign.
She has to justify it.
She needs it. Yeah. And her conscience bears witness against her. And she's probably hates herself. And even like, listen to pro-life people, oftentimes when women do have abortion on the back end, they hate what they've done. But you have this whole culture that's lied to them. So that's the dance is like, they're fully culpable, but you had a whole society, maybe even had parents like, no, go get an abortion. Like your life is ruined, blah, blah, blah. And now here she is like every day dealing with the reality. I've aborted my kid. Is there any freedom for me? And I just kind of wish I would have led much more with that reality rather than being willing to debate abortion. Now when I'm on campus, I almost never debate abortion. kind of one of my, I thought it was pretty funny. Fortunately, the crowd thought it was funny. I was at San Diego State or UC San Diego, and these girls were at topless, my body, my choice, and they're protesting me. And I'm like,
Well, wonderful. Thank you, feminism.
I was like, I'm not here to talk about abortion. You know what I mean? I'm literally not here to debate abortion. And I tried to move on and preach, and these girls kept bringing it up. And I said, look, I'm not out here to debate abortion with you, because the way I look at it, if your kids are going to turn out like you, just go ahead and kill them now. Just kill them now. And what was funny is they go, what? You bleeping Nazi? Is like, you're the one who wants to kill your kids. Like, how am I the Nazi? If I tell you to kill your kids, go get an abortion, I'm a Nazi. Tell you not to do it, I'm a Nazi. I'm just gonna. And fortunately, most of the people there in the crowd laughed. But like, I'll just kind of, if abortion comes up, I try to be as blunt as I can. Like, I'll just say something effective like, if you're not worshiping the love of God, of course you're going to want to murder your children.
Yeah.
Because you women, you're made to be Eve, the mother of all living, and you've upended your role in the world. And now you want to kill your children. The mother of all living. I was like, what a great atrocity. But I'm stealing this from a guy named Peter Kreeft. Your whole philosophy is contrary to the gospel. The heart of the gospel is Jesus Christ is found in the Eucharist. Jesus Christ saying, this is my body, which is broken for you.
Yeah.
You feminists say, this is my body. We'll do with it what we want. And so you have two radically different approaches to what your body is and all these sorts of things. And so what you need to do is basically return to God. And once you begin to worship God, that'll orient you sexually, orient you towards your children and all that sort of stuff. But that's the only way forward for you. So I'm willing to debate abortion, but like what I try to do when I'm out there actually is we have our stereotypes of here's what the Christian thinks about and talks about abortion, homosexuality. So in a way, I try to avoid all those things simply rhetorically, because everybody at one level knows what I believe about them. But on the flip side, also when they bring those things up and I answer the question, I can just say, well, you guys asked me. Well, you're out here talking about hell. Well, you asked me about hell. You're out here talking about homosexuals. You asked me about and they're like, oh, that's true. And so then it kind of alleviates, because they all kind of have an idea. They're going to bring it up. So just rhetorically, I found it has been more effective to avoid certain issues, especially the stereotypical ones, you know what I mean? And try to lay out, again, try to bring the gospel in through another way. So.
And that's the thing is you're not talking to an idea, you're talking to a person.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of the times these people's identity is wrapped up in their hurt, in their pain. Girls want to be loved, guys want to be respected, but at the end of the day, everyone wants to be loved.
Mm-hmm.
And if your dad didn't love you, if your mom didn't love you, if your dad left your family, you're going to, as a girl, you're either going to, I'm going to transition, I'm going to find a community that loves me for who I am, and that who I am is dependent on the love is dependent on who I am, right? They don't love me. The trans community is not my friend. But the other girls they'll go sleep around. They're looking for love. Guys are looking for respect. That's with the rise of people like Jordan Peterson and the rise of Chris Williamson and Joe Rogan and all these people who are preaching a gospel of become respectable, earn respect, take on responsibility, do all of those wonderful things. But everyone is looking to fill an absence in their life that their father did not fill, not do. He didn't do his job.
Yeah.
And so that's a lot of the problems I would imagine that you run into is just these people have been blinded because this attacking abortion or attacking transgender or queer or whatever it is attacking them.
Yeah. And even like the story I told with a girl with it's a good thing to get a stoner adulterer, because that probably deeply affected her. Her dad probably committed adultery, and to realize that which was outside of you, and that's the thing. So Christianity, we have the world, the flesh, the devil, and I would just say very broadly in our culture, we're reformed people generally from a certain tradition, and we usually just want to go after the flesh.
Yeah.
And I think one of our main points of contact that we can do in evangelism is go after the world. So like the world has damaged you in these ways, and then you bring in how you are now resentful, bitterness, and you're fully culpable for those sorts of things.
Right.
So what I've tried to do over the last few years is go after the world. And so even something as simple, two things. When you talk about fathers, I got arrested last year. I spent 2 days in a Memphis jail for preaching, and every man in there was looking for respect, and like in one way or another. And they all had the emotional development of a 3-year-old. None of them had a dad. And they all had and so now you have a 6'4", 230-pound man with the emotional control of a 3-year-old. You know what I mean? And you're just like, that causes damage. But like, it actually filled me with tons of like, I hate the word empathy, but I was just like, man, like it almost is like when Paul talks about fighting brute beasts in Ephesus, you're like, these men are almost just brute beasts. They have almost no reasoning capacity. They have no emotional control. And it's the whole world has kind of done them wrong. And now they're in a jail in Memphis for one thing or another. And they're fighting for respect. And you see it where they want to talk about who they're associated with gangs or whatever it is. And that kind of helped give them some respect. Lost my train of thought. There was something with
The queer and trans, or the
has something to do with the evangelism with kind of the world aspect
oh yeah,
of
yeah,
things.
yeah.
But I kind of lost my train of thought.
You're attacking the world in that that was actually like the adultery was wrong.
Yes.
That was horrible.
Yeah. So that I would just say, as you're thinking through evangelism, so oftentimes like in our reform world, we want to go after the flesh, and your heart's sinful, blah, 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 blah. But there is that element where so many things have been upended that I'm totally comfortable addressing the world first and how the world has hurt them, be it the woman, the dad with adultery, those sort of things, and then bring it back to the gospel in that standpoint. Because there is an element where, even as I'm trying to lay out, if we can start with even like the doctrine of creation, is like the world that God made was good. And so the world that we're experiencing is not the way it's supposed to be. And that can be my point of contact with them. And then from there, develop into their sinfulness, because we're in this place where my identity, like you're just so caught up in a certain identity things that what they end up hearing, even if we think they're intellectually wrong, what they end up hearing is like, if I'm out there saying, oh yeah, you black people are sinful because you're black, it's just like, well, that's crazy. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
or,
right.
or you're left-handed. And for most people, a lot of their identity issues is yoked to them in that way. And so what I've kind of found is going after that's what I was gonna say, the piece outside of them. So what's amazing to me, oftentimes people will be like, oh, what about friendship evangelism? Like, what's amazing to me is how much people trust me while I'm out there preaching. Like, I'm a middle-aged dude showing up just preaching. And like people, like the number of people will be like, hey, I was abused. I was, boom, boom, boom. Like so many things.
Yeah.
And part of it is like, I'm a little bit safe because I'm not in their life every day. So there's
Right.
a certain
Yeah.
element of safety there. But girls particularly. And what's interesting to me, the number of times if someone has told me they were abused, there was this girl at Oregon State particularly I can think of, really sweet girl, just comes in, she had her shaved head. I think she identified as non-binary, just came in hot. And as we're going back and forth, I finally just said to her, I was like, I'm not against you, right? And she just starts crying. And then as we go a little bit further, she was abused. And I was like, well, the state of Oregon, and she grew up in the church. I was like, the state of Oregon, it sounds like, I would say the state of Oregon and the church has failed you. I was like, the person who did that, he should be executed. She's like, you think so? I was like, yeah, what happened to you was so evil. That's what happened. And it was almost like a relief just to hear like, no, I think what happened to you was so evil that the person who did it should be put to death. And I think even like having that category that like, whereas like, we just kind of treat the violator not as evil, but as, oh, well, they're kind of messed up. You know what I mean? Something.
Everyone's got a problem.
Yeah.
And that problem, his problem just led to your problem.
Yeah, led to that. And if we had enough empathy for him, we could understand it. Whereas like, no, what happened to you was an absolute evil. It was so evil and such that this man should be. And it's kind of funny. And as I started saying that over the last few years, I can't remember the first time. I think it was at Colorado, one of the first times I said it. I just remember this girl, like the relief on her face.
Yeah.
And so anyway, that's good news. That is good news to someone who's been violated in that way.
Right.
That there is justice. And even that kind of ties in, even with some of the Summer Floyd, all that sort of jazz stuff, is one of the freedoms that we have as Christians is we believe in a final judgment. So if you've been deeply violated, you can either live your whole life that person's getting away with it, and you can sit there and seethe, or you can still be angry, but have a certain level of justice that the Lord will raise this person from the dead and judge them.
And I wonder how many of these girls, and girls especially, feel that they are in some way guilty for the sins of their father against them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I think like even if you listen to like some counseling on abuse sort of things, where like even one of the confusions is more so boys in having this is like there's some sort of pleasure they've derived from it. You know what I mean? So like you have this weird thing where like you're having pleasure amidst being violated.
Right.
And so you're like, well, how do I make sense of this? And so I think that's all part of the confusion is, and Satan's a liar. And so, if he can, you go back to your room and if he can tell you, oh, it's your fault. Like you think of like a little kid going back to the room, hurt and abused, and a devil in there being like, oh no, it's your fault. And, and your body's the problem. If your body was not like that. So I think all those things together, as what we want to do as Christians is continually present the truth of who Jesus Christ is, what he's done, what he's accomplished, and that he's Lord, and that goes in all ways, that he redeems as well as judges, and all of that is good news for the Christian.
So, how much of this is when you're campus preaching? How much of what you're trying to do is tell them, explain to them that they are not guilty of the things they're not guilty of, and
That's
how much of it is these are the sins that you are guilty of, and I just need you to recognize that.
that's 50, I would say kind of 50-50, because we all have false guilt and real guilt. And what you're
Right.
trying to discern through is, what is your real guilt? Your real guilt isn't that you violated certain elements of America's norms, or, da, da, da. Your real guilt is before God. And here's what God's character requires of you. Here's what it does not require of you. And trying to tease that out. And a lot of that conversation. So publicly, I am dealing much more broadly on, just say, lying. I've never met, I'll say almost every day, I've never met a college student who hasn't lied. And everybody out here knows lying is wrong. And if you're a Democrat, you get all bent out of shape when Donald Trump lies. If you're a Republican, you get all bent out of shape when the Democrats lie. But you're the liar. But you lie. You know what I mean? Like, you need to be bent out of shape with your lying. And the reason your lying is wrong is because God himself is truth. It's not because white people say lying is wrong or black people say lying is wrong. Lying is wrong because God is truth. And the truth will judge your lies and oppose your lies. So then when you're dealing with a little bit more of a counseling, so I preach for roughly 4 or 5 hours a day, and you kind of have an arc. You start preaching, crowd builds, you try to keep a good sustainable crowd from about noon to 3 or 4, then it begins to taper off, and then you have about 15 people, 20 people that are generally more interested. I'm sitting in a chair like this, and you're kind of having a conversation. And that's when you're much more trying to diagnose the very specifics, like the conversation I said earlier with the girl, like, do you think America's healthy? Colorado's healthy? You're healthy? That was a smaller group at the end of the day.
Yeah.
And so that's that's kind of the arc of the day is you have the big meeting where I am throwing out just a bunch of stuff, bread on the water, try to get as many people engaged as I can, and then bring it back to, my favorite part of the day is actually sitting in my chair for the last 45 minutes talking to people in smaller groups. I wish I could almost have that immediately every day. But I do have to show up, start preaching. Because if I just show up with my God is love sign, I'll have 2 or 3 people come and talk to me throughout the day. It's just a much slower day. But if I preach, and especially even kind of did with, as a middle-aged guy, I can't go up to women and be like, hey, you want to talk about Jesus? I'll say, mace me, and get away, creep. And so even there's a method of madness of I can show up if I start preaching and they come to me, it's just a totally different ball game. So that's the dynamics you're trying to shake out.
Have you noticed a difference in the attitude on campuses across America since the death of Charlie Kirk?
Initially, yes. I think it kind of ties into a more divide. It was so the first few days, I was actually preaching in Montana when he got murdered. So I stopped preaching and talked to people off on the side. And then the next day I preached in South Dakota. And most of that was just young men coming up to me, asking me questions about Charlie Kirk. So I didn't really get a good crowd going like that. But then I was actually really pumped because on the following Monday, I preached in New York and it had a huge crowd. And usually if you start to get towards a couple hundred, it's chaotic just because someone's heckling and so, you know what I mean? And I might throw some fastballs and stuff next thing you know, it's just a total scrum. Yeah. And they just listened. And I was like, this is I was almost nervous. It's kind of funny because you get used to certain days. I'm like, I'm not used to a crowd being this big, this docile. So in my head, they're going to leave at any moment because there's no action keeping them here, but they were glued, you know what I mean? But then sadly the next day I preach in Vermont and I'm being pushed again, spit upon and threatened and all that sort of jazz. And so since then, I would say that the semester's been a lot. I would say a lot of the days have been much more fruitful in the straight up, students just gather and listen. But you still have your antithesis guy. I was up in Michigan and, almost every day, some guy, if Charlie's name comes up, some guy's kind of doing that sort of thing. Yeah. So I do feel like there's, and I feel like it's been building for a little while. There's been a spike, I would say, of interest in Christianity. Charlie's death, I believe, has heightened that. So I think it has definitely given people pause. And the Lord, I do think the Lord's just broadly moving in a lot of people's lives and bringing more people into the church. I think the death of Charlie Kirk plays into that.
What do you do when the Michigan guy starts making fun of Charlie's death?
Yeah, not entertain him. Just it's like pearls before swine. So I just move on.
Yeah. Yeah. How often do you run into that on other topics? And what's that? Because, I would imagine the blue or green haired girl who's yelling at you, there's, you had to have thought, is this even worth, is it worth having a conversation with her?
Yes. And that was, a little bit, this isn't a compliment to myself. It's more like little bit of a realization that day in New York when I had a really good crowd, there was a guy who's just a total jerk. And like other days, I probably would have entertained him to draw in more people, get the crowd going. And I remember that day, I was like, why would I entertain them? They're just listening. And that's the dance I'm trying to do. So like, I have to make that decision during the day is like, it's like playing a football game. Like what play do I run now? And early in the game, I show up, I start preaching. I'm probably willing to throw some pearls before swine. So it's like, if he's going to skip class and get more people to skip class and go get their lunch and come back, but then I have to pivot off of him. You know what I mean? And so actually kind of a funny story of where I actually really dropped the ball. It was right before COVID. I was preaching in Arizona and had a good crowd, fun. They were really attentive. They were listening. But a girl brought up abortion. I just say, hey, look, if I was an 18 to 22-year-old woman, pregnant out of wedlock, I would think my life is over. I can easily see why you're tempted to go get an abortion. If that's your position today, if that's the condition you're in, you let me know. We'll help you financially, get you through school, help you with your child, blah, blah, blah. So I just write checks. I assume I'll find somebody that can write the check for me.
Right.
Like, I can't take care of her, but someone will. And then there was a Jewish girl sitting there, and we had interacted a little bit earlier. She goes, oh, that's so easy for you to say with your white male economic privilege. So I thought I'd be funny, and I shouldn't have run this play at this point. I go, my white male economic privilege, you Jews are the ones with the economic privilege. And at that point, like everybody's papers are in the air. It's like, we can't believe it. And
was it like happy or was it like?
No, they're like couldn't believe I would, how dare you say that? And the place has kind of exploded. But what was crazy is she left. She came back literally with a pack of homosexuals. And they are literally groping me. Like, and one guy's grabbing my beard trying to kiss me. And I'm trying to back up, walk away. And as I'm walking away, you had a couple homosexuals here, and I remember these two lesbians here, and the girl's going, "What's wrong? It's just a kiss. What's wrong?" And I'm going, #MeToo's. What's wrong with it? #MeToo's. What's wrong with it? So I'm backing up, and finally I tell the guy, I'm 5'6", I can't fight a lick. And I remember telling the guys, like, you touch me again, we're going. You know what I mean?
Yeah, right.
And like in my head, there's a couple of them that I'll be fighting. So in my head, like, Patrick Swayze in Roadhouse. I'm going to push this guy, punch that guy, and I'm probably going to get mobbed after that, but I'm throwing. And so he grabs my beard again, and I remember pushing him, and as soon as I did that, the girls come running after me. I was like, well, I can't throw a punch at a girl.
Shoot, what do we do
My
now?
plan is now. And then finally, the police were there. They finally step in after I push the guy, and I get to the other side of the police, and a guy comes up from behind me, just decks me and rings me up. And it was kind of like being in a wave. And because I was like, I didn't know where I was, so disoriented. My glasses came off, and I was like a boxer trying to find his glasses. Like I was so rung up. And but anyway, the point is, like, that's a play I shouldn't have run. Like, my day was going so well at that point. Like, in the first 30 minutes while I'm preaching to get my crowd saying you Jews are the ones with the economic privilege, totally legitimate play.
Yeah.
2.5 hours in a day, and people are sitting there listening to me, and it's pretty conducive to being fruitful and stuff like that. There was no need for me to run that play at that point.
Right.
You know what I mean? And so that's one of the things, and that takes a little bit of wisdom. Like you get out there enough, you get enough reps, and you kind of realize, here's what I should say, here's what I shouldn't say, and every now and then you drop the ball like that, and,
And you get punched by a gay guy.
you get groped, you get sexually molested. You do have a Me Too moment,
right?
So at least on the bright side, I can relate to the Me Too people. That I was literally being sexually assaulted on a college campus.
Yeah.
Like if I was grabbing a guy or a woman in the way that they were grabbing me, I would have ended up in court. You know what I mean?
Right. And all over the face of Twitter and Instagram.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And so, but when they did it to me, it was like, what's wrong? It's just a kiss. And so, so those are the things you're trying to navigate when you're out there, is thinking through, what play do I run? Because I am. I'm trying to get a crowd. I'm trying to keep a crowd, and yet I don't want it to go overboard. And so if I describe it as a bell-shaped curve, you have your days that are zeros where I can't buy a crowd at all, and nothing. I will say nothing's more humiliating than standing out there yelling at a tree by yourself.
I would imagine, yeah.
But if you have like 100 people there, like, and people want to make fun of you, but when you're no one's listening to you, and some 18-year-old's like, get a real job, loser. You're like, oh yeah, I probably should. And then you have your 10s where the police are literally like, hey, would you mind shutting it down? It's so out of control. And the ideal is 4 to 6, where you have energy. Actually, I'd prefer it like the 5 to 7. You start to get to an 8. It's just a little too chaotic for me. But if you can get it in that 4 to 6, 4 to 7 range, where you have some energy, people are engaged, you're like, there really is nothing better I'd rather be doing. I'm like, and it's kind of like, oh, this is what I'm wired for. This is, it's just a good. And as you're observing people standing out there listening to you, you can see them literally get softened to the gospel. You can see people get hardened to the gospel. And and when I'm doing that, I'm like, this is what I was wired to do. So
what does a good crowd look like demographically?
I like when people who disagree with me are listening. And then I also love when Christians are there. So I would say, for the most part, my main niche is going to be white and black progressives. And
Okay.
then from there, conservatives are going to kind of come in and listen. But as far as people arguing with me, taking issue with me, it's going to be generally your more left-wing type student, opposed to your right-wing. Your occasional, what's interesting is like, I preached in Utah, the place where Charlie was murdered a week or 2 weeks prior to him getting murdered there. And there were a lot of Mormons, obviously, because they're in Utah. And they were such nice people, you know what I mean? And they really liked me. And that's the hard part. And I'd be like, Joseph Smith's not a prophet. You know what I mean? Like, I'm not trying to be rude to you guys or disrespectful, but we have a lot in common. And Mormonism only exists because Christianity does. So I would say, so demographically,
but Mormons don't get rowdy.
No, they're usually respectful. The Asians are usually really respectful. Very rarely do they ever get upset with me. If they're Christians, they're oftentimes the Presbyterians, and so they kind of are able to discern through. If I'm in Southern California, the Korean Christian community broadly is very well read, and I just feel like they're more theologically astute than your average white evangelical type church. They come from Korean backgrounds. All the girls' names are Hannah or Grace. The men are always David. And so, so I would say that the main people coming out to listen to me are generally, and obviously it depends on what state you're in. California, you're going to have just more diversity. You're going to have more Hispanic kids, more Asians.
Right, yeah.
They're going to be listening. But even the Asians and the Hispanics generally don't. They're usually very respectful. They're really kind to me. So racially, those are the most respectful. Whites, it's interesting. They're, and part of it, we share a lot in common. They can oppose me adamantly, blah, blah, blah. The thing that's interesting to me is sometimes the black community, if they're on board, they're great. If they are not on board, black women particularly are the worst, because they'll be cussing up a storm. I got the spirit. You can't say nothing. And you know what I mean? You're just like, I don't think you got the spirit. But spirit of
your
something.
language indicates otherwise.
And I will re-up this. I will say Middle Eastern Muslim women are the worst.
Really?
They're mouthy. It's like they're all like that Alana Omar up in You know
yeah.
what I mean? It's all like they're submissive in their culture because they'll be beaten there, but like here they're like, oh, I got to run my mouth and no one can do anything about it. I got to have a hijab on and be oppressed.
Yeah, no one can tell who I am.
Yeah, and no one can say anything because like if I speak up against them, I'm just being a racist. I'm being misogynistic. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
They're almost the lowest man on the totem pole if you're getting into your oppression Olympics. You know what I mean? You got Islamophobia, you got misogyny, you got racism, you got the whole nine, and so they kind of hang out at the bottom of the rung. So I would say in general, they're probably the group I least enjoy interacting with. So I also think they're one of the most manipulative. They do a really good job of playing that liberal democracy game of immediately bringing in Islamophobia and stuff like that. But yeah, so I would say it's generally the mix, but the main people who are going to get my crowd going more often are going to be your left-wing white people.
What do you do when you've got like black ladies or Middle Eastern ladies who are just being excessively rowdy and not helping anything?
Yeah, it all depends on where we're at in the day. Again, very early on, poke a little bit. So if I can say it, P.T. Barnum said, if you want a crowd, you start a fight. So if they come in hot, you poke them a little bit. If we're in the middle of the day, you try your best to ignore them, to be honest with you.
Okay.
That because engaging it more often than not, it's unreasonable and there's no reining it in. Interesting enough, just like culturally, because there's not as much emotion, I would be more apt to interact with like a Middle Eastern Muslim woman than a black woman, especially if the black woman says she's a Christian. For more often than not, the black woman who's claiming to be a Christian is very, like adamant, and because she chalks her passion up to the spirit. And
right.
So it's just a different conversation. But yeah, I generally just try to ignore especially when I realize I'm in a certain demographic where I can't win right now. You know, no matter what I play here, I'm going to lose, and I have to try to bite my tongue. And what you try to do is call on other people, and then you just kind of say something to the effect of, "Hey, I don't care if you disrespect me, but could you at least be respectful to their question?" Yeah. And that way, you kind of take it a little bit off of you and put it on their peers. And usually, they want to try to at least some level respect and assimilate with their peers. So that's usually kind of the MO is I got to get it off of me, try to bring other people into the dialogue, and that way, if they continue to be mouthy, they're interrupting other people rather than just me. So
how often is the LGBTQ crowd willing to have a conversation and play ball?
Daily. Like,
okay, really?
You'd be amazed. Yeah, I would just maybe I'm just getting older, but it's like one of those things. It's like, man, I just think they're in so much pain. And the thing is, like, I remember I was up in UMass one time, and a guy accused me of because of you, a million kids, I don't know where he got his numbers from, commit suicide every year. And I was like, you're giving me way too much
Me
power.
personally? Wow.
I know. You're giving me way too much power. I was like, look at the way people respond to me. I've never left campus once and thought I'm going to go
Yeah.
kill myself because my stuff got stolen. I got punched. I got spit
Yeah.
upon. Not once have I thought about killing myself. You've given me too much power. And I was like, you know what? I think the real issue is you guys actually need me. I was like, the minute I stop telling you that you're sinful, then you have to go kill yourself because you know something's deeply fractured in your being.
Yeah.
And when everybody's telling you that you're great, you're beautiful, you're wonderful, and you know you're not, your only option is to go kill yourself. I was like, so I actually think I preserve your lives rather than commit suicide. But your whole culture telling you that you're great and you're beautiful and you're wonderful, that's when you realize it's an empty bag. And it was interesting because he stayed around, listened, and then he's like, well, and he brought a whole group too. And they had these signs like Jesus had two daddies and all these different signs. And finally, I remember kind of going back and forth with him. And I remember the crowd got so big, I ended up standing up on these stairs, looking out over the crowd, and the guy was to my left. He goes, well, if you don't hate me, will you hug me? So I hug him, and he literally turns to his group and goes, what do we do now? And it's so funny. It's like, I genuinely don't. You know what I mean? You guys are the ones who hate me. You know what I mean? And I always tell them, I was like, I'll go buy you dinner. I'll go hang out. So I would say, obviously they give me a lot of pushback. I don't want to paint a rosy picture because they're, if you Google my name, I mean, they write awful articles about me. Yeah. And you snap pictures of me all day. You're like, oh, here he looks like a monster. We'll use this picture and we'll put it with this story of how he hates the gays and he hates the blacks and he hates the Jews. And it's always just hate. You know what I mean?
Yeah, right.
And so, I would say every day though, they want to interact. And that's a thing where I think Christians need to grasp is, and again, it's kind of the hard part. Individually, many of them want a gospel. Because even if you talk to them, they'll often say, look, I didn't want to get into it. I never wanted to be. I would always wrestle with it. And there's probably some element of truth to that. You know what I mean? I don't think they just wake up one day. And I think even with the rise of pornography, one of the things we have to realize is like the way that brings people into a lot of this stuff. I think the ubiquitous nature of pornography brings people into at least the queering of sexuality. If you're a little kid at 11 years old, the average age is 11 years old when people see pornography now. And if you're observing this at 11 years old to 13, I was at Iowa State one time and a young man came out. He's like, hey, would you mind if I shared my testimony? And he was part of a pretty good church there. So I was like, yeah, sure. And he basically shared his testimony. I was 11 years old, I started looking at pornography. At 13 years old, I started looking at gay pornography. I thought I was gay by the time I was 13, 14. My dad kicked me out of the house because I was gay or thought I was gay or something like that. He's like, a year ago I became a believer, but it was just all these things that drew me down into it.
Yeah.
But then, the gospel has saved me from it. So anyway, the point is, I would say a lot of them want to have conversations with us. And it is like more often than not, they're suspicious of us, but if we're willing to be clear and gracious, you can have a lot of conversations.
Because they know there's something wrong. I mean, I would imagine part of the problem you're dealing with some of the more problematic people who are just there to kind of shout and yell is that they truly believe that they're actually correct, and they've got everything nailed. They've got everything correct.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas I think a lot of the LGBTQ people, they understand that there's a problem in their life and they actually need to address this because they can feel their grasp on reality and their grasp on their own life slipping.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And if are willing to be there for them and be hospitable and kind, also at Washington State, at 18, 19, I worked at Trinity Reformed Church here. And I would preach a lot at Idaho and Washington. The first time I actually interacted with a guy that I thought was a woman. And I remember it was interesting. He asked me a question about the Gnostic Gospels. The end of the Gospel of Thomas basically says that women must become men to enter the kingdom of God. Yeah. And so as I'm talking to what I thought was a woman, I said, oh, how absurd is the Gospel of Thomas? It says you must become a man to enter the kingdom of God. And they start laughing. And then 2 weeks later, they come up to me and they're like, hey, do you remember me? I was like, oh yeah, you were asking the question about the Gnostic Gospels. Like, oh yeah, blah, blah. And they're like, then they end up telling me, I was like, are you a Christian? And I asked if they're, and they're like, oh, well, I'm not anymore. And I was like, why not? Like, do you really want to know? I was like, sure. And they're like, well, I've transitioned. I was like, oh my goodness. Cause I really thought I was interacting with a woman. Like, yeah. And part of it was at like 14, he started buying pills from India, online. And so at 14, he started taking pills and I pleaded with him. He didn't take me up on it. I thought he was going to. I was like, look, come and stay with me. You can live with me. Because he was graduating, he was going to work for Microsoft. He's going to take a signing bonus, go to Thailand and get surgeries and stuff like that. And I was like, don't do it. You can live with me, stay with me here. And they asked, well, will you out me? I was like, no. I was like, obviously, if you present yourself
relationally towards somebody. I'll have to
Yeah.
speak up, but and they're like, well, what name were you? And I was like, I think it was Catherine. I was like, the only name I have for you is Catherine. I was like, I don't have anything else. You know what I mean? And I was like, and to be honest with you, it's going to be awkward if I interact with you because I'm not going to say she. I was like, and I realize it sounds disrespectful to you, but I want to respect you. And if you were anorexic or bulimic, I would not be respecting you by being like, yeah, you are chubby. You know what I mean? Like, it's not
Right,
respectful. It's actually being destructive of who you are. So I think assuring you in it, and I was like, I know you hear me being disrespectful, but if you could put yourself, and that's one of the good things with empathy, if you could have empathy towards my position,
Yeah.
put yourself in my shoes and think through the issue, I'm actually being disrespectful for you. So if you can
Yeah.
at least understand where I'm coming from, like, okay, that makes sense.
Yeah.
But sadly, they didn't come stay with me or anything like that. But yeah, we have to be willing to suffer some level of cost. That's a minimal cost, have someone stay with you for a while, but we should be willing to, obviously I don't have kids, so that plays into a freedom to be, take
To be able
risks
to do
in that
that,
way. Yeah. Cause I would never invite them in around my children.
Right. Yes,
So,
exactly.
yeah.
Well, and so telling that their first question was, "Are you going to out me?"
Uh-huh.
That's wild. That they weren't like, "Are you going to respect my pronouns?" or anything like that. But like, I don't want to feel any more guilt or shame than I do right now.
Uh-huh.
Are you going to reveal this secret to other people?
Have the gaze,
I-
have the lies,
right.
And you just realize how much. I was reading something by Jean-Paul Sartre the other day, and he was talking about one of the things hell is other people, and it's because you're constantly in their gaze, and so he just so whatever was all going on with him emotionally and everything else. But yeah, this idea that hell's other people. So for them, it's this other people are looking at me and seeing me, and the reality that I'm not as I'm presenting myself. Yeah, it's pretty wild.
Have you started preaching out against pornography more frequently recently?
I've always preached against it. I actually read a really good article, a guy named Reed Merker Schuchart back in like 2001, and it's worth Googling. It's called The Cultural Victory of Hugh Hefner. It's just a really good, and it was basically laying out Hugh Hefner's life. The thing that's kind of funny is, so how I kind of talk about pornography is I will start with Hugh Hefner, who gave us Playboy magazine. And on the first issue of Playboy magazine was Marilyn Monroe. And so if you look at the trajectory of the life of Marilyn Monroe and Hugh Hefner, two radically different lives. Marilyn Monroe had numerous abortions, drugs, dead at like 36. Hugh Hefner makes like 94. Playboy mansion surrounded by a bunch of buxom vixens and all that sort of jazz. So that's kind of my inroads into it. And it's kind of a broader sweep against the sexual revolution and just asking the question, well, who won the sexual revolution? Hugh Hefner or Marilyn Monroe? I was like, the men have won the sexual revolution. Hugh Hefner never took any responsibility for anything. You know what I mean? And I won't get into details on the podcast, but read Merker Schuchart on as Hugh Hefner got older, how he had to have an orgasm was basically totally perverse. You know what I mean? So he's totally perverted.
Oh yeah.
And so that's my aim. But what's interesting to me is all the men almost just concede right off the bat. Yeah, it's ruining my soul. Like there's almost no debate with a guy on a college campus over porn. So that's a good thing. But what's interesting, and it's changed a little bit, is the women push back on it because they want this sex positivity thing and they want to be sexually liberated and all this sort of jazz. And I think with so women kind of give me a pushback. Where 10, 15 years ago, if I went after porn, women would probably be like, kind of agree.
Yeah, because they're like, I'm being objectified. I don't like this.
It's destroying. Yeah, it's destroying of me. Whereas I think that's gone a little bit. And young women now, I don't remember what the numbers are. I'm making these up, but it was something along these lines. Like say like in 2000, like 83% of young men were looking at pornography and like 23% of women. And now it's maybe close to like 60% of women. Are looking at it. And so it's surprising the increase of the use of female pornography.
Yeah.
And so
I want to ask why, but I also don't want to ask why.
yeah, and I think it's just I think it is just kind of the world. Like you have a conscience, you kind of want to be that. And another piece actually worth listening to, what is her name? Bridget Phetasy, Phetasy, I believe is her name. I regret being a slut. And so one of the things she says in that piece, and you can watch her on YouTube reading it. It's really good. She says, the thing I hate the most about what I did, wasn't even in and of itself the hookups, which were horrible, but it was the lies I would tell myself that I'm empowered. And she was like, she's like, I would tell myself I was a feminine goddess. The reality was I was full of shit. You know what I mean? So it's like that reality, I think people lie to themselves. And so you meet women who are older without children. Like when I lived in New York, you'd interact with some women who are in finance or lawyers and they're successful, but they're 36 years old, they're not married, and they're like, one-on-one, they'd be like, I'd give it up to be married. But then publicly, I'm a strong, independent woman. You know what I mean? So I think that's kind of the hard part. It's kind of like the social contagion. It's I think women get exposed to it, think people are doing it. You don't want to be the prude, but it is kind of shocking. Because when I was growing up, whatever, too much information, but I remember being at a high school party and people putting stuff into like a VHS, and all the girls immediately left the room. You know, so it's like
because guys, there's an immediate every guy understands the appeal of pornography, but for girls, I wonder if it's just like the same thing if they want to be loved, and this is there's someone loving someone else, and that's the closest they're gonna get. I don't know.
I don't. I've tried to listen to some podcasts on it, and no one's given me any insight because I was trying to think through. Well, how do I preach this on campus?
Yeah,
you know what I mean?
right.
Because the fact that men are all conceding right off the bat, and women are like, "Boo!" You're like, how do I? And not being a woman, and in my head, women have always been like against it. You know what I mean?
Right?
Like,
yeah.
And that was one of the things I had in common, like in college, where like the feminists were against pornography. You could rely on that, and now things have it.
Yeah, can you imagine being pro your own destruction and your own objectification? And your own,
yeah. I do think things like OnlyFans, they get this idea that you can have like I've even literally heard women use this ethically sourced pornography. so the old pornography was run by men, so it was bad. But now that you have OnlyFans, you can ethically source.
It's like ethically sourced meth. I mean, you gotta have organic meth.
You can't have no chemicals.
This is
no GMOs or anything like that. So it's totally that sort of. But that's the sort of oddity that you have. But even one of the things that's interesting, kind of a little bit tied into like authority and dads, all that sort of jazz, is one of my favorite things to say on campus. If things get a little bubbly, and especially if it's any sort of feminism thing, it's like, oh, girls, let me give you a quick dating advice. And they're like, we don't want it. It's like, yeah, real quick. Girls, if a guy asks you out, you ask him if he looks at pornography. If he says yes, you tell him no. But if he says no, then you can say, you can talk to my dad. And then before COVID, if I got to the, if they say no, then you say you talk to my dad, they would start yelling at me, why would I have to talk to my dad? That's ridiculous. I don't have to talk to my dad. Now they're like, well, why would he talk to my dad? I was like, because you're not low-hanging fruit. You want to make it. And so even just that cultural pivot where I feel like they're willing to hear, now you can tell them that, like, no, you should be protected at some level. You're not low-hanging fruit for these guys. And it was kind of funny, not in like your not so funny way, is oftentimes a girl will yell out, well, then we'd never get a date. And so I think there's also just that reality that like, oh, everybody just does this. And so we have no alternative other than guys who look at this. So
it's been wonderful seeing the move against pornography, even from people who are not self-proclaimed Christians, just generally, they would consider themselves moral people who are like, hey, this is a real problem and it's affecting people's minds. And a lot of scientists are coming out with papers about these are all the effects of pornography that are having downstream effects of like, that's why guys aren't asking girls out a lot of the time, is because they don't view a girl as like another person. They just view them as some sort of object to their own sexual pleasure. I mean, C.S. Lewis had this quote, 1800s was when Lewis was around?
No, 1930s.
Early 1930s.
I think he died. I think he died
because he was in the war. He was in the war. Now I sound like an idiot. But he was like, when a man says that, when a sexually mischievous, sexually depraved man says that he wants a woman, it's not that he wants a wife. It's that he wants the sexual pleasure that can be derived from a woman. He doesn't want kids, and he doesn't want a house, and he doesn't want curtains to hang, and things like that. And so, I don't know how that translates into women then looking at pornography, but it makes sense that the girls are like, well, based on my dating pool, if 83% of the guys in my age group are looking at porn, then there's a race.
Maybe that's what they want. Maybe that's what a guy wants, and so maybe I should watch that. And kind of intertwined. Stink. Lost my train of thought. Was you were talking about C.S. Lewis? Lost my train of thought on the kind of the sexual revolution, but it's like, that idea of Hugh Hefner, like, men don't. It's a total negation of responsibility. That's what pornography has given men, is just a total, and then the hookup culture has also given them that. And so that's why the point is, like, men have won the sexual revolution because it's actually the negation of responsibility, and women are hung out to dry. And then from there we have abortions. All these things are intertwined. Like if you begin to look at the holistic picture, the whole sexual revolution is bad. And to your point a minute ago, I think it is good the number of people are beginning to speak up. And even I will say they might be looking at it. And I don't want to berate them for this, but like it is like you have young men looking at it, but they just know it's bad for their souls. You know what I mean? It's like
they hate themselves for it.
Yeah. It's like the drunk who's like, but how do I stop drinking? It's like, I know it's ruining my life. It's ruining my family, but I have no way out. How do I get out? And so that's even another area with young men where we have a very clear, helpful thing. And you kind of mentioned the guys ask them out. I saw a stat that was like maybe 49% or 59% of young men have never asked out a girl in person. So I'll bring that up on campus. The number of women who applaud, they're like, yeah, thank you for saying something. I was like, yeah, get a pair of balls, guys. And,
Yeah, right.
and actually go ask them out. And all the women are like, yeah. I was like, but girls, you also have a responsibility not to be like, oh, that guy's so creepy. I was like,
how dare he look at me?
Yeah.
You're a girl.
Yeah.
You're cute. Of course I'm going to look at you.
Yeah,
Don't be a dingus.
What is he going to do? Never ask. Yeah. And then you want to complain they don't ask you out.
Yeah.
And then when they do, you want to present it as being this. No, that's part of the dance of what men and women need to do.
Yeah, guys aren't girls. They are going to objectify you to a front. You got to like be aware of that. It's get too much too far.
Yeah. And tell them to go. Now you can talk to my dad.
Yeah, right.
Make him jump through some hoops. And so, you just kind of, anyway, but those are the sort of things actually that's been fun the last few weeks was, I was in Nebraska and I spent about 2 hours talking to a young black man who grew up. He was adopted by a white family at 13, and he was in and out of foster care, and he just had tons of anger and resentment towards his dad just for not being there, and also his mother. But it's kind of funny how guys operate. Like, hates his dad. His mom gave him up for adoption, wasn't there for him, but kind of can view his mom as like, well, she didn't really have any choices. You know what I mean? My mom was at a tough spot. She was, but dad, he was full on bitter with him. And what was interesting, like talking to him though, is like so many kind of like basic aspects of life that his dad should have just helped him walk through, like we talked about. And then even the next day, I was in Colorado. There was a young Hispanic guy, grew up without a dad. And even something as basic as like trying to encourage him is, I remember telling the young black man to be like, well, I think he was 24. I was like, in 6 years, I was like, you got to think through where can you be in 6 years? Like, you're nothing what you can be emotionally, psychologically, financially, physically. You have so much growth you can happen over the next 6 years. And he had a notepad. He was literally just like, emotionally, what were the other ones? You know what I mean? And he was a little right now. He's like, man, I need to think that through, because I think he wants to get his life together, but it is like the men because he was actually from Nashville, and I told him I spent some time in the Memphis jail. He's like, you were in Memphis jail? I was like, I'm not fit for
different
the Memphis
reasons.
I'm not fit for the Memphis jail. But like, it's almost like he doesn't know another way. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And like he's trying to, he has enough. I think the family that adopted him at 13 gave him enough of a vision that's helpful.
Yeah.
But here he is at 24 trying to get his legs under him.
And that's why, God bless Jordan Peterson for the work that he did, not only in encouraging a lot of young men, here's another way out. Mm-hmm. This is, you don't have to live in this self-depraved circle to the bottom, but also for like encouraging, because of the work that he was doing and how he wasn't Christian, but a lot of people were, more people were listening to him than were listening to Christian evangelists.
Yeah.
And so that was a big wake-up call for a lot of pastors and evangelists and thought leaders who were like, we're doing something wrong here, because he, who's not a Christian, who's a self-proclaimed atheist, who has no affiliation, very little affiliation with the divine, back in 2013, is getting more people than us because he's telling them how to get out of the hellhole they've dug themselves into. And
if you want a beautiful picture of Peterson too, and kind of like in a very pastoral way, he was at Liberty University like in 2016, 2017. Maybe at a graduation ceremony, a young man just comes running down the front, Mr. Peterson, I need your help. I need your help. Mr. Peterson. And like, you look at it like, and we're Christians, and I'm not one of those people in any way, shape, or form want to poo-poo prayer, but you see Peterson, when the camera goes, you see Peterson down on the ground hugging the guy. You know what I mean? And the guy who's like, the Christian guy was like, let us pray. You know what I mean?
Yeah, right.
Like which one is more like in a sense embracing the young man and his despair?
Know the time.
Yeah. And it's just like, all right, we're going to go. And like, again, you're in a big arena. You want to give some grace where you're like, what do we do in this situation? But yeah, that was one of the things that stood out for me with Peterson was like, man, he just got on the ground with that guy and was on the ground hugging him. And the guy needed help. And so even that pastoral element of what he was providing to people, I think was pretty powerful. And so, on the bright side, I think a lot of people have woke up to that because like Christianity kind of became like this just pietistic, my heart, there's no male, no female. We're just kind of floating in the air, and dads and mothers and servant leadership. There's just all these things that were kind of rolled out. It was
just not practical at all.
Yeah.
It was just an ethereal mist of like feel goodiness.
Yeah, and it kind of like, or maybe an abstract theology. Like Reformed world was kind of an abstract theology at points. Like get really into Calvinism, but even like as we're talking about a little bit earlier, studying Hebrews, studying 1 Peter, suffering like. All of their Christology is eminently practical. Like in 1 Peter, when he's going through, he's basically expounds on Isaiah 53 in the context, and it applies to all of us, but slaves, obey your masters, even the unjust ones, for Christ himself suffered. And he goes through Isaiah 53 and how you basically are fulfilling in yourself this now suffering. And so this whole Isaiah 53 wasn't just, oh, Jesus out there. It's now you're united to Christ. And this is you as a slave relating to your master. Like, I admit that's hard to tell. Like, if I was in a context where someone was a slave and be like, Isaiah 53, like, because I'd be like, I'm an American. I'm like, okay, let's bust you out of this thing.
Right.
And let's overthrow what's going on here. And Peter is writing them saying, nope, submit to the emperor, slaves, submit to your masters. And so anyway, the point is, like, all of their Christianity, and that even ties in a little bit, like, I was really into like expositional preaching. And I'm not going to be fair to John MacArthur because I've not listened to him in 25 years. I've maybe listened to him twice. But like, to me, the expositional preach that he would do was almost just an abstraction. The times I listened to it, whereas when you get into Paul's letters, you realize almost all of Paul's letters are situational. And so I wanted to avoid what we would nowadays call topical sermons, but Paul's letters are basically topical. As he's writing the church at Corinth, he rattles off he addresses the Lord's Supper, he addresses sexual immorality, visiting temple prostitutes, the resurrection. And so it just made me realize that like a lot of the things I was afraid to address early on in my Christian life, because I wanted to make sure I was really being faithful to God, which I thought was kind of like, and again, obviously I think everything's rooted in the Trinity. Just give me an abstract doctrine of the Trinity and I'm being faithful to God. You know what I mean? Whereas you realize the reality of, be it biblical law or even Paul's letters, are eminently practical. And I think the rise of a Peterson, at least for my camp of men, broadly, a certain type of reform thought, was very helpful to be like, oh, wow, we should be eminently practical. Because we're also afraid, I was actually taught very almost firmly, if you're familiar with like the law-gospel dichotomy distinction, and almost that, and so you're almost afraid of any real application because you don't want to be legalistic. And so you don't want to be moralistic, legalistic. So any application was almost pure legalism. Everything just ended with the death and resurrection of Jesus. He did it for you. Don't worry about anything.
Right. Yeah. And as opposed to like, get your act together.
Yeah. He died, rose for you. You died with him. You've been raised. Now do A, B, C.
You've been saved to good works.
Yeah. Now go do them.
Right. Exactly. Speaking of which, how can people who are interested in getting involved in campus ministry and interested in following you and the work that you're doing, what resources, what steps should they take, things like that?
Yeah, so if you want to follow me, campuspreacher.com is my website, Campus Preacher on Instagram, Campus Evangel on Twitter. Some dude has Campus Preacher. And he has never tweeted. So if you know Elon Musk, and you can get that handle over to me, I'd be greatly appreciated.
Well, they're going to deactivate handles that haven't been active for like 5 years.
Oh, really? Yeah, because this has been active. All right, good. So I'm going to try to poach that. So how do you go about doing it? So for me, I saw that guy Jed preaching. I fell in love with it. So first of all, I would say there's two things. So I think every Christian at a certain level is called to evangelism. So 1 Peter 2:9 says you're a royal nation, a holy priesthood, blah, 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 so that we may proclaim his excellencies, who brought us out of darkness into his light. So every Christian at a certain level, obviously a mom, her evangelism is going to look different. But if you're a woman at the park with your kids and you start interacting with some other woman, pray, can I share the gospel? Yeah. Can I share the gospel with her? So I think every Christian should be involved. I'm kind of come out of circles where everybody was hyper evangelism. If you're not doing it, you're unspiritual. But now I feel like I'm in circles where people are like, I haven't shared the gospel in years. You're like, well, that ain't it either. So I would say, so I do think someone like what I'm doing is a calling. So I don't think everybody's called to do it. But if you would like to get involved with campus preaching, it's kind of like riding a bike. You just got to go do it. And eventually you'll figure out, like, who are you as an evangelist? And so for some people, it might be setting up a book table and you just have a bunch of books. Like one of the most fruitful, like I've seen people set up book tables and not get anywhere. I was with a guy last year in Richmond, Virginia, Virginia Commonwealth. The stream of people that he'd come to his book table was impressive.
Yeah.
And then I was in Nebraska, Omaha, Nebraska, 2 or 3 weeks ago. There was a guy out there, stack of Bibles, just had a sign, free Bibles. If you have any questions, let me know. And just had a steady stream of people coming up to him. So think of, okay, what can you do? What are you good at? For me, if you want to do public preaching, I would just say it's like riding a bike. You got to go out there and preach. You're going to stink your first 6 weeks. I stunk. I might still stink, but I really stunk my first 6 weeks. And then I was able to get crowds and keep them after 6 weeks. And I was able to, after about 3 weeks, I was able to have content for about 2 or 3 hours. And part of it is I just start thinking about it all the time. You know, I'm just being all consuming. Yeah. Then from there, I would say, like, if you're going to campus preach, just start reading. Even like some of the people I've mentioned, Louise Perry, Bridget Fidesi, Jean-Paul Sartre, like if anything goes viral, I try to pay attention. Like, what's what can I poach from this that's going to communicate to people?
Yeah.
So what can I kind of steal? Because there's something in here that's resonating with people, and I want to try to tap into that. So try to pay attention to like what's going on and think through, all right, how do I apply this to the gospel? So I would say, but I'd also say this, like and again, this deals with like, what do you want to do? This is not what I'm trying to do. I know some guys will go out there and almost give a sermon. Like no one's going to sit there and listen to you for 40 minutes. Like for me, I have to get the crowd going. If I don't have a crowd, like when people start sitting and just listening to them, I'm like, oh, this is going to be a long day, because I can't keep, like, I don't have enough content just to keep people there off the cuff for 4 or 5 hours. If people start asking me questions, I got content for 6, 7, 8 hours, whatever. We can go all day as long as they're asking questions. So if you want to get involved, go do it. Like you just have to show up to campus, do something. And then from there, find out. And this is kind of the hard part without having, like, it's kind of like if you have a team of people before you, you can start watching them do things and be like, okay, you can do this. But I would say the main thing is try to go out with some other people and then have people say, hey, you do this well, focus in on that. And what you're going to discover that, you might be a little bit more apologetic oriented. You might be a little bit more straight gospel preaching oriented, and try to figure out who you are. So I see myself as being a bit more of like cultural critic sort of thing. It's not straight up apologetics, it's not straight up gospel preaching, but it's kind of trying to take my theology and just kind of apply it in those things, which in turn is apologetic in nature, cultural critic, and gospel preaching. But it's like, I don't know if this is accurate, but it's almost like, I'm a little bit more of a Swiss Army knife is the way I look at it, more so than like a good dagger or a gun. You know what I mean? Like I kind of, here are my tools. Here's what I think I can do well. And I just try to focus in on that. And I've been criticized by other street preachers. I don't preach hell enough. I don't preach the gospel enough because I'm, get off into apologetics or even just talking men and women things. And people just think you just got to tell them about Jesus. And then from there, like, who cares about your critics? Like, you're gonna get blasted, especially if you start to get crowds. Like I said, if you Google my name, there's been some awful articles written about me. When your mom's like, "Why don't you like the Jews?" I was like, "I do like the Jews, Mom." Articles said, "You're like, Mom, I told you not to
listen to the article. I'm your son.
Don't Google.
Don't call me.
Yeah, don't Google me. I told you not to Google me." And there have been times where I've literally gotten emails. I got blasted in an article a few years ago in Central Washington, and some people emailed me like, "What are you saying out there?" I was like, "Oh, the article's all a lie." And it was funny. Sometimes I'll bring a recorder out to record myself. That day I was like, it's Central Washington. It's a slow campus. I won't need it. Sure enough, I wish I had it.
Yep.
So yeah, that's the main thing. Just go out. You just got to do it. Best advice I got very early on, I met up with a guy in Washington, D.C. He's like, you can preach, just need to do 2 things. Take 2 steps back and include everybody in your answers. So if people started coming up and talking to me, I'd go up and start talking to them, and I'd cut off my crowd, and I'd start having one-on-one conversations. He's like, take 2 steps back, include more people. And the other thing is, like, you're way too apologetic for being out here. It's kind of like, please listen to me. You know what I mean? So I didn't want to be the Hellfire and Brimstone guy. So I was kind of like, hey. So I was basically Joel Osteen. You know what I mean? Hey, everybody, I'm Keith. You know what I mean? Trying to be up.
Please look over here.
Yeah. And he's like, no, show up and preach where they have to listen to you.
Yeah.
And I was, and then, like I said, it took me about 6 weeks, but about 6 weeks in, I felt like I finally got my legs under me. Be like, all right, this is who I am. This is what I do. And then I was at seminary. I'd go once a week to the University of Missouri. And the good thing then is just say, I don't know. People ask you questions. If you don't have an answer, just say, I don't know, but I'll be back next week with an answer. That's what I do at the University of Missouri. I go back to seminary, study for the week, come back with an answer a week later. And the best thing you do is say, I don't know. Don't bake an answer. Mm-hmm. Also, one of the best advice I ever received, that guy, Jed Smock, I love it. I could tell Jed stories all day because I love him. Despite maybe being a heretic. He died 2 or 3 years ago now, but I met up with him in, I think it was 2000 or 2001. And there was like 5 of us that met with him. And he's like, if you're going to preach on campus, and he was a holiness preacher. So he really would say things like, I haven't sinned in 25 years. So
unlikely.
He's like, but to his credit, it was a funny line. He's like, I haven't sinned in 25 years. You can ask my wife. And so and his wife like, he hasn't sinned. And so, but he was like, if you're going to preach on campus, you have to be holy. And he's like, because people are going to ask you about your life. They're going to know if you're lying.
Yeah.
And he's like, there's 3 reasons to be holy. Fear of hypocrisy. Waxes eloquent for a minute on hypocrisy. He's like, but eventually you'll convince yourself you won't get caught, and you'll end up committing that sin. Another reason to be holy is fear of the Lord. And he goes, fear of the Lord is to hate evil. Fear of the Lord is to do righteous, and blah, 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 blah. He's like, but eventually you'll convince yourself that God's all loving, God's all forgiving. He'll look the other way. He's like, the main reason to be holy It's because you love God. If you love God, you'll do no wrong. He's like, so learn to love God.
Right.
And it was just like the best exhortation ever. And I was like, yeah, I want to love God. And all three of those have kept me at different points in my Christian life. But was one of them kind of tied in that story, which is so great. Back in like 2012, 2013, I was at Oklahoma and I met up with Jed, or I didn't meet up with Jed. I preached there on a Monday. I show up on a Tuesday. And I preach differently than Jed. So I show up on Tuesday. He was already there, and they had like a little sign, "You deserve hell," and all this sort of stuff. And so when I get there, the students, just a handful of them come over to me, beeline it to me because I was there the day before, and they're like, "We like you, him," and I'm not going to sell him out in front of everybody.
Yeah.
So I'm like, "Oh, well, we do things differently," and blah blah blah. But one of the things I liked about Jed was he had a sign, "You deserve hell," and the kids kept bringing up the sign to me. I was like, "Look, I'm not going to sell out the sign. I'm not going to defend the sign." I was like, "I don't have a sign. I don't use it. If you have a problem with it, go talk to him." And they just kept wanting to talk to me. Finally, Jed just gets up and he puts the sign in the car, comes back, and they stopped talking about the sign. And just the fact that he like cared enough, like, okay, I'll put the sign away. But I ended up going up to him at the end of the day. I was like, "Hey, I gotta let you know, you gave me one of the best exhortations." And he was also a charismatic. He was like a Pentecostal. And because I asked him, like, "How do you spend your time on the road?" And he's like, "Oh, well, da da da." He's like, "I don't sleep much. I'll wake up around 3. Then I'll pray in the tongues." Like,
as one does.
At 3:00 in the morning.
Brush teeth, pray in tongues.
And he goes, and I told him the little exhortation. And I was like, "Yeah, fear of hypocrisy, fear of the Lord, love God." He goes, "Huh. I don't remember preaching that. Must have been something from the Holy Ghost." And so that was probably one of my favorite exhortations. Though I still vividly remember it. And the way he would preach was very sing-songy. Like everything was kind of up and down. And he would the way he'd inflect his voice. So I felt like if I listened to him, I could remember most of the things that he said. So yeah, those would be the two things: get out, do it. Read as much as you can. Be prepared. Read the Bible. There's going to be a bunch of things you don't know. I think we were talking earlier. You said something to the effect of like, you ever get stumped out there? And the thing is, usually as an obscure Bible verse at this point, they bring up something in Jeremiah or Isaiah that I'm just not prepared for. Your typical objections are all epistemologically related. So, all right, a little bit of a program. Start studying. There's a guy to go get, John Frame. Go read some John Frame books. That'll help orient all of your thinking on the bigger issues of ethical, metaphysical, and epistemological issues. Those might sound like fancy terms, but if you're going to go out preach on campus, at least have those in your pocket so that if people bring them up, you have at least an idea of what they're talking about.
Yeah.
And try to think them through. John Frame, for me personally, has probably been the most helpful voice in shaping my thinking on those things. So I'd encourage everybody to go read John Frame. Another guy that's helpful, go read Jim Jordan's Through New Eyes. That just kind of helps you orient you towards the Bible. And so a lot of the hermeneutical issues that come up on campus of Bible contradictions, like once you start reading the Bible a little bit differently than like in a very wooden fashion, it opens things up. So that would be my main advice. Go do it, love God, and then show yourself approved, start studying. And then from there, you'll be like, this is what I'm really called to do. And I've seen a lot of people raised up over the years that end up retreating because it is kind of a hard life, especially if you like, this isn't like, it sounds so arrogant. I have a hard life. Because I just spent, the last 8 weeks on the road, and a lot of times you're in other people's homes, and, financially it's not like the most lucrative thing in the world, and all that sort of jazz. And so there's a social cost. If I had a wife and kids, I wouldn't be able to do what I do. And so that plays in. If you have a wife and kids, your primary responsibility is to them. You can't be like, "Oh, see you in 8 weeks." I couldn't just hit the road for 8 weeks and come back to a wife and kids. So there's a cost involved that if you're a single guy right now and it's something you really want to do, I think there's you got to look at the broader picture. Even though I'm not married, I wouldn't say, "Oh, I'm called to singleness." I was just however the Lord's providence has worked out, here's where we are. So I think there's that social cost, because from there, Christians are going to think you're a freak. The world's going to think you're a freak. People are probably going to write bad articles about you. Then, if I ever
your mother will read them.
Yeah, your mother will read them. If you ever go try to get a job in finance again, they're like, "The Jews, huh?" You know what I mean? Like, I won't be able to work in finance again. So anyway, they're just all those sorts of things. And I would just say, at the end of the day, there might be 2% regret here or there on missing out on ABC once in a blue moon, but 98% of the time, this is absolutely what I'm wired to do. And by the grace of God, if I'm fruitful for the next 20 years of my life, 30 years of my life, I'll do it until I croak. But if I stop being fruitful and I think that I'm no longer good at it or being fruitful at it, I'll go do something else. So
not finance.
Yeah, not finance. I think I'm done. I think I'm done with that. And so, once you're at it, it's been 15 years. I think they would. It'd be hard to go back to some sort of I don't think anybody would want me, but yeah, definitely not in New York. It'd have to be some Christian firm that's willing to.
Yeah, right.
And I'd have to change my name. So if anybody does Google me, yeah, that's something I have to consider. So
there you go. Keith Darrell, thank you so much for joining me.
Thanks for having me.
It's been a pleasure.
Yep. Good to talk to you.
See you guys.